Hello there, and welcome to The Tired Thinker, where small thoughts wander slowly and quiet reflection feels like rest. Tonight's gentle question drifts around something hidden in plain sight: the mechanics of habit and the chemistry of wanting. Every scroll, every sip, every tiny decision hums with the same quiet current: dopamine. It's not joy itself, it's the anticipation of joy. It's the whisper that says, maybe just one more. But what if the real secret to peace isn't breaking habits? It's understanding how they work. How tiny cues, invisible loops, and soft rewards train us without our noticing. How awareness, slow, kind, patient, might be the quiet antidote to the pull. So tonight, let's think softly about the brain's gentle machinery. Let's learn how to notice without judgment, and maybe, slowly, learn to rewire our wanting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it right now in your small corner of the world? It's strange, isn't it, that we're scattered across the planet, yet here we are, sharing the same quiet curiosity about how our minds move. A whisper loop begins quietly. It's the tiny moment when you check your phone without thinking, or when you reach for another bite even though you're full. It's when your brain leans forward before you do, reaching for something small, predictable, and just satisfying enough to repeat. That loop, cue, action, reward, is the pattern behind most of what we call habit. It's a closed circuit of behavior, powered by one simple molecule: dopamine. But dopamine is not pleasure. It's the signal that says something good might happen soon. It's the spark of anticipation, not the flame of joy. The difference matters, because what drives us isn't usually the reward itself. It's the wanting, the whisper that says, do that again. Imagine you're sitting at a desk. You've been working for a while, and your mind begins to drift. A small part of you wonders what's happening online. You open your phone. There's a new notification. It could be something interesting. Your brain leans forward. You tap it. For a moment, you feel a pulse of satisfaction. But almost as soon as it arrives, it fades. You put the phone down. A few minutes later, the same pull returns. That's the whisper loop, a soft cycle of expectation and brief reward that repeats because the brain keeps predicting that the next time will feel better. It rarely does, but the chemical signal insists that maybe it will. Dopamine was never designed for the modern world. In early humans, it helped us survive. It encouraged us to explore, to hunt, to gather, to seek new shelter or food. Each spark of curiosity carried a small dose of motivation. That was useful when survival depended on noticing small chances and acting fast. But in the present, the environment is flooded with signals designed to hijack that same mechanism. A phone screen, a shopping app, a streaming platform. All these systems offer endless small rewards. They're engineered to sit perfectly within the range of what keeps dopamine alive. Not too predictable, not too random. When something always rewards you in the same way, the brain stops caring. When it never rewards you at all, it gives up. But when the reward comes sometimes, unpredictably, it stays alert. That's what psychologists call a variable ratio schedule. It's the same pattern that makes slot machines addictive. Every like, every message, every new episode in the queue runs on that same rhythm. And because dopamine builds habit through repetition, these micro moments start to wire themselves into your nervous system. The cue, the phone buzz, the app icon, the idle boredom, becomes a switch. Once flipped, it's hard to ignore. But not every whisper loop looks digital. Some are quieter. Maybe it's the routine of checking the fridge when you're not hungry. Maybe it's rereading old texts. Maybe it's buying something small just to feel a shift in mood. Each act carries its own chemical echo, a small release that keeps you coming back. The tricky part is that none of this feels loud. There's no explosion of pleasure or thrill. It's soft, almost invisible. That's why it works so well. Big rewards would make us cautious. Small ones keep us calm and consistent. The loop continues because it feels harmless. But over time, it rewires behavior in ways that are easy to miss. Consider a morning routine. You wake up, roll over, and check your notifications. That single act does more than fill a few seconds. It sets a chemical tone for the day. Your brain learns that attention equals stimulation. Even before you've left bed, the reward system is already primed to seek more novelty. Later, when work feels slow or a task requires focus, that same loop whispers again. Check something, scroll something, refresh something. The whisper becomes a rhythm your mind learns to follow. And like any rhythm, it repeats without asking permission. Dopamine loops don't rely on willpower. They rely on prediction. Your brain doesn't care whether the behavior makes you happy. It cares whether it can guess what comes next. Predictability equals safety. That's why it's easier to keep an unhelpful habit than to form a new one. Even if the old loop makes you tired or distracted, it's known. The unknown feels riskier. You can see this pattern everywhere, in the way people rewatch familiar shows instead of starting new ones, or how we visit the same websites without knowing why. The loop feeds on routine because routine is efficient. It takes less thought. The whisper says, just do what you did last time. Breaking that cycle doesn't start with resistance. It starts with awareness. When you notice the cue, the moment before the action, you insert a pause. Even a few seconds of observation weakens the loop's automatic power. The brain relies on speed to close its circuits. Slowing it down confuses it. For example, when you feel the urge to check your phone, try describing what you're feeling out loud or in your mind. There's the pull, there's the wanting. No judgment, just recognition. In that instant, you shifted from being inside the loop to watching it from outside. The chemistry doesn't disappear, but you've changed your relationship to it. Awareness is not about denying dopamine. It's about working with it. You can build new loops that serve you, habits that use the same mechanism, but lead somewhere steadier. A walk after lunch, reading before bed, a moment of silence before opening a message. Each becomes a cue, an action, and a reward. The brain doesn't care whether the habit is scrolling or stretching. It only tracks repetition. Over time, the small, consistent rewards of calm action begin to replace the scattered sparks of digital noise. The loop becomes quieter, gentler, still driven by dopamine, but tuned to balance instead of craving. The whisper loop isn't an enemy. It's an old friend that learned the wrong song. When you listen closely, you can hear it trying to keep you safe, to keep you moving, to keep you close to what feels familiar. The task isn't to silence it. It's to teach it a new rhythm, one that ends not in endless wanting, but in quiet enoughness. It begins as most things do, with noticing. Anticipation is the real reward. Most people think happiness comes from getting what they want, but the brain tells a different story. It releases dopamine not when we have the thing, but when we think we're about to have it. That chemical surge pushes us forward. It's the feeling of almost done, almost there, almost satisfied. The chase feels alive because the brain makes it so. Imagine you're watching a delivery tracker for a package you've been waiting for. You refresh the page every few hours. The little bar moves closer to out for delivery. Each update brings a small wave of excitement. When the package finally arrives, you open it, hold what you ordered, and within minutes, the thrill fades. The chase had energy. The catch feels flat. That's not a sign of boredom or greed. It's a normal pattern of how dopamine works. It builds motivation before the reward and quiets down once the goal is reached. This pattern keeps us moving through life. In the past, it helped people hunt, build, and explore. The brain rewarded curiosity and effort because survival depended on them. Without the chemical push of anticipation, no one would have gone looking for food, shelter, or safety. The system worked well in an environment where rewards were rare, but in the modern world, it can turn on us. When everything is built to trigger that sense of almost, we end up chasing feelings more than outcomes. Consider the way social media works. Every notification is a possible reward. It might be something interesting or nothing at all. The uncertainty keeps dopamine levels high because the brain loves prediction errors. When something surprising happens, especially something better than expected, the dopamine spike grows stronger. But the moment you check and see the result, the chemical wave drops. The thrill is over. You scroll again, searching for the next small rise. The chase continues. The same thing happens with online shopping, video games, dating apps, and even news feeds. The design isn't accidental. These systems rely on anticipation to hold attention. They don't need to offer big rewards. They only need to promise that the next one is close. The chase becomes the habit. The catch is just a reset. Think about waiting for a text reply from someone you like. The seconds stretch. You glance at your phone, wondering when it will light up. That tension feels electric. Your brain releases dopamine every time you think you might hear from them. When the message finally comes, the tension dissolves. You feel a short burst of relief and then return to waiting for the next one. The cycle restarts because the brain has linked attention with excitement. This is anticipation's trick. It convinces us that satisfaction lives in the goal. But what we're really hooked on is the approach. We feel most alive when we're close to getting what we want, not when we have it. The moment of having is calm, sometimes even dull, compared to the chase that led there. Advertisers understand this. They don't sell products. They sell the feeling of being about to have something new. Coming soon, limited edition, almost gone. These phrases trigger the same chemical process. They build tension, and the tension feels good. The reward doesn't have to live up to it. Once you've bought the thing, dopamine quiets down, and the brain looks for a new chase. You can see this in smaller everyday loops too. You might open the fridge, not because you're hungry, but because you expect something inside to change since the last time you looked. Or you might refresh your email again, even though you checked it 2 minutes ago. The behavior isn't about the result. It's about the possibility. Each time, dopamine fuels the thought that maybe something new will appear. That same mechanism runs beneath ambition too. Working toward a goal releases more motivation than achieving it. A person training for a marathon feels driven and focused. After crossing the finish line, they often feel lost for a while. The structure that gave their days meaning is gone. The brain has no more chase to feed. It's why people who reach big milestones often set new ones quickly. They aren't greedy. They're wired to keep moving towards something. Dopamine's design isn't a flaw. It's a feature that helped the species survive. But when everything around us offers easy access to anticipation, it becomes exhausting. Endless choice means endless chasing. You can want something new before finishing what you already started. The brain rewards the plan more than the payoff. You can end up running on motivation alone, fueled by the hope of satisfaction that never fully arrives. This is why rest feels strange for so many people. Stillness doesn't feed dopamine. It doesn't provide a cue or a next step. The mind searches for something to anticipate, even in quiet moments. You might open a new tab, check a different app, or start planning tomorrow, just to feel that small chemical lift again. It's not laziness or distraction. It's anticipation looking for somewhere to go. The trick can be softened by noticing it. When you realize that most excitement comes before the goal, not after, you stop expecting lasting happiness from arrival. You begin to see the chase for what it is, movement for its own sake. You can start to enjoy the process without confusing it for fulfillment. A person learning a new skill feels bursts of anticipation each time they approach progress. Once they reach the level they wanted, the feeling fades. But if they pay attention to the act of learning itself, the small challenges, the mistakes, the repetition, the dopamine loop works in their favor. It keeps motivation alive without relying on constant novelty. The trick becomes a tool. Anticipation can make ordinary life feel rich if it's not running unchecked. Cooking a meal, tending a plant, waiting for a friend, each carries small moments of expectation. The brain still releases dopamine, but it happens in a natural rhythm, balanced by the satisfaction of being present. The chase ends in calm, not emptiness. Understanding how dopamine rewards the chase doesn't mean removing the chase. It means seeing it clearly. The chemical push that once sent hunters into the wild now sends fingers to screens. The mechanism is ancient. The world around it is new. The only difference is where we direct the energy. Once you notice anticipation's trick, you start to choose your chases more carefully, not because the catch will change, but because the way there can. The quiet chemical moves through you all day. You don't feel it the way you feel hunger or warmth. It doesn't shout or demand attention, but it shapes what you do, what you chase, and what you call joy. That chemical is dopamine, and it runs on wanting, not having. People talk about happiness as if it's something to hold, something that stays once you find it. The truth is, happiness is a brief signal. It flickers, then fades. What lasts longer is the desire that gets you there, the movement towards something that feels like it will make you happy. Dopamine fuels that movement. It whispers, "Go get that," and gives you energy to do it. When you reach the goal, dopamine steps back. The silence that follows can feel like emptiness, but it's only the pause before the next chase begins. Think of a child at a fair. The child spots a balloon stand. Eyes wide, they tug on a parent's hand, pull them through the crowd, point at the bright colors floating above. The parent buys one. The child beams, clutching it tight. 5 minutes later, the balloon is just another thing to hold. The thrill is gone. What felt like happiness was mostly anticipation. The real reward, chemically speaking, was the moment before getting the balloon. The wanting, not the having. Adults don't grow out of this pattern. We just trade balloons for bigger symbols, promotions, likes, purchases, relationships, achievements. Each promise lights up the brain's reward system, and dopamine rises to push us toward it. Once we get it, the signal fades. It's not failure or greed. It's how the system works. Wanting is the engine that keeps us alive. Without it, we'd stop reaching for food, learning new things, or solving problems. But in a world built to offer endless goals, the quiet chemical can turn life into a constant chase. You can see it in small moments. Someone scrolls through an online store, eyes darting over pictures. They don't feel joy from owning these items. They feel energy from imagining what owning them might be like. That's dopamine in action. Not pleasure, but pursuit. When the package finally arrives, the excitement fades almost instantly. The brain has already moved on to the next target. The quiet chemical doesn't rest for long. This doesn't only happen with things, it happens with people too. A new crush feels electric because the mind is filled with what-ifs. Every text, every meeting, every pause between words fuels the circuit of wanting. Once the relationship becomes familiar, that surge settles down. Love changes shape, but dopamine's job ends. That's why the early stages of romance feel so alive. They're full of uncertainty and expectation. The chemistry of wanting is stronger than the chemistry of having. Even learning works the same way. A student feels motivated before understanding a new topic. The brain lights up at the thought of solving it, not at the moment of comprehension. Once they grasp it, dopamine drops and motivation slows. That's why it's easier to start something new than to keep going once the novelty wears off. The quiet chemical prefers beginnings. It runs on curiosity and prediction, not comfort. This cycle, rise, reward, fade, is how the brain keeps us moving. But when everything around us offers quick hits of anticipation, it can become a trap. Modern life gives endless ways to stimulate dopamine without much effort. Notifications, advertisements, short videos, instant feedback. Each one sparks a little bit of wanting. Each one fades fast. You reach again, scroll again, tap again. The pattern repeats because the quiet chemical keeps whispering that maybe the next one will feel better. A person might check their phone dozens of times a day, not because anything important is happening, but because their brain has learned that a small burst of novelty feels good. Even when nothing new appears, the possibility is enough. Dopamine fires in anticipation, not in result. That's why the urge to check is stronger than the satisfaction of what you find. The wanting outweighs the having every time. This can sound bleak, but it's not hopeless. It's simply the truth of how human motivation works. You can't remove the chemical, but you can understand it. When you know that happiness fades by design, you stop expecting it to last. You begin to focus on rhythm instead of peak. You notice the small, steady rewards built into daily life, not the sharp bursts that fade, but the slower forms of satisfaction that grow with repetition. Imagine cooking a meal. At first, dopamine drives you to start. You picture how it will taste, how the kitchen will smell, how good it will feel to eat. Once you begin chopping and stirring, the quiet chemical keeps you engaged. The reward shifts from imagination to process. By the time you sit down to eat, the anticipation has passed, and what remains is calm contentment. It's softer than happiness, but it lasts longer. You can build this pattern on purpose. When you understand that dopamine powers movement, you can use it to start healthy habits instead of chasing empty ones. For example, if you want to read more, don't focus on finishing the book. Focus on opening it. The brain rewards the act of beginning. Once you start, momentum takes over. Dopamine releases again each time you make progress, even in small doses. The same rule applies to exercise, learning, or creative work. The chemical doesn't care what the goal is. It only cares that there's a goal to move toward. That's why it helps to set tiny, clear targets. Each small success resets the loop without the crash that follows bigger, rarer goals. When progress feels steady, dopamine flows in manageable waves instead of spikes. the brain stays motivated without falling into exhaustion or emptiness. Still, even with balance, happiness will always be temporary. It's a pulse, not a state. The quiet chemical isn't designed to keep you satisfied. It's designed to keep you seeking. You can fight that, or you can accept it. When you see happiness as a moment instead of a destination, you stop trying to stretch it. You let it rise and fall the way it's meant to. Dopamine is not joy itself. It's the engine that moves you toward joy, again and again, in cycles that mirror the beating of the heart. The space between bursts of wanting isn't failure, it's rest. The quiet chemical hums in the background, waiting for the next reason to act. It's not loud, but it never stops working. It's what keeps life moving forward, one small spark of wanting at a time. Micro cravings shape more of your day than you notice. They begin before you're fully awake. You reach for your phone. You don't think about it. Your hand moves on its own. The small urge to check, to know, to see if something happened overnight. This is a craving. Not the loud kind, like hunger or thirst. The quiet kind that lives in seconds, not hours. Micro cravings are the small, invisible pulls that guide behavior. They appear between thoughts, disguised as habits. Each one comes with a short burst of dopamine, a tiny promise of reward. That chemical signal doesn't shout. It nudges. It says, maybe this will feel good. And so you act. You check, you scroll, you sip, you adjust. It's not a decision, not really. It's a reflex built by repetition. Imagine sitting at a desk with a task that needs attention. You open your email first, then a notification lights up. You switch apps. A minute later, you're reading something unrelated. You didn't plan this chain of actions. Each shift started with a micro craving, the flicker of curiosity, the whisper that said, maybe there's something new. The brain rewards the act of checking with a small hit of satisfaction, even if what you find is unimportant. These cravings are small but constant. They steer behavior like a current. You don't notice how far you've drifted until you look up and see the time. That's the power of the quiet chemical system at work. Dopamine doesn't just create big desires. It fuels the small ones that repeat until they become structure. Micro cravings don't always come from devices. They live in gestures, thoughts, and routines. The urge to open the fridge, even when you're not hungry. The reflex to adjust a playlist before the song ends. The habit of rereading a message thread or checking for updates that probably aren't there. Each moment feels harmless on its own. But together, they build the shape of your day. If you could map every small urge that pulls you from one action to another, you would see patterns. The same cues appear: boredom, uncertainty, waiting. The mind looks for movement whenever stillness appears. Dopamine rises not because of joy, but because of potential. The possibility of something better keeps you reaching. The small reward is the relief of curiosity, not lasting pleasure. Picture someone standing in line at a coffee shop. They pull out their phone. They check messages. No new ones. They open a news app, scroll for a moment, put the phone away, then pull it out again seconds later. Nothing has changed, but the urge repeats. That cycle has nothing to do with content. It's driven by chemistry. The act of checking itself releases a sliver of reward. The brain learns that movement equals comfort, even if the outcome is empty. This pattern repeats across the day, at work, at home, while cooking, while resting. Each small craving feels like a choice, but it's mostly momentum. The brain likes predictability. It builds loops from repeated actions, even unhelpful ones. Over time, these loops harden into identity. You become the person who always checks, always refreshes, always reaches. The design of modern life encourages this. Everything around you competes for attention. The colors, sounds, and vibrations of digital tools are engineered to activate micro-cravings. A red badge, a small buzz, a delayed notification. Each cue invites your brain into another cycle. Because dopamine spikes in anticipation, not reward, uncertainty keeps you hooked. You never know which tap will deliver something meaningful, so you keep tapping. Micro-cravings also appear in conversation. The pause before someone answers a question can spark a mental flicker. Did I say the wrong thing? Should I fill the silence? The discomfort pushes speech. Even when silence would be better, the same chemistry that drives you to check your phone drives you to seek reassurance in small ways. You crave closure. You crave movement. It's not all negative. The same mechanism builds useful habits too. The urge to stretch, to clean, to check in on someone, to learn something new. All start with the same small internal push. The difference lies in awareness. When you notice a craving, you have a chance to choose what to do with it. Without noticing, the loop runs automatically. Imagine 2 mornings. In the first, you wake up and check your phone right away. Messages, weather, headlines. The day starts with stimulation, and the brain adjusts to that level of input. By afternoon, quiet feels uncomfortable. You reach for the next small fix. In the second morning, you wait 10 minutes before looking at a screen. The brain's baseline stays lower. The same micro-cravings still come, but they arrive softer. Easier to see. That small difference compounds across hours. You can't remove cravings completely. They're built into the system that keeps you alive. But you can understand them. Every time you feel the pull to check or reach, pause for a second. Ask what started it. Boredom? Uncertainty? A gap between tasks? Usually, the craving is less about the thing itself and more about avoiding a feeling. Consider how this plays out while working. You're focused on a project. It gets difficult. The brain doesn't like friction, so it looks for something easier. The small urge to check something else appears. You follow it. For a few seconds, the discomfort disappears, but so does focus. Micro-cravings trade depth for relief. They help you escape effort, but they steal progress in return. The same happens with eating. You reach for a snack not out of hunger, but out of restlessness. The act of chewing or tasting provides a quick hit of novelty. The body wasn't asking for fuel. The mind was asking for change. That's why diets often fail when they rely on restriction alone. They don't address the craving for stimulation that drives the behavior. Awareness is the only real tool against automatic loops. When you see the craving as it happens, it weakens. You don't have to fight it. You just watch it appear and fade. The chemical wave peaks and passes within seconds. If you don't feed it with action, it dissolves. Over time, the loop rewires itself. The brain learns that not every urge leads to reward. Micro-cravings never stop completely, but they lose power when exposed to attention. You start to notice them as signals rather than commands. You begin to see how they connect, how one small decision becomes a pattern. The brain still whispers, but it doesn't drive. The tiny urges remain, but you steer. Reward shadows follow you everywhere. They appear after every good moment, every purchase, every goal, every small pleasure. You feel a burst of joy, and then it fades. What lingers isn't the happiness itself, but the memory of its promise. The shadow stays longer than the light. That's how the brain works. It values the signal that predicts reward more than the reward itself. Dopamine is the chemical behind that pattern. It doesn't wait for pleasure to happen. It spikes in anticipation. It says something good is coming and gives you the motivation to move toward it. The actual reward, whether it's food, recognition, or relief, causes a smaller response. When the reward ends, dopamine levels drop, and the body returns to balance. That drop feels like loss, even though nothing went wrong. You simply moved from wanting to having, and the brain switched gears. Imagine planning a trip. You count the days, check the weather, look up restaurants. Each step feels exciting. You picture what it will be like. The anticipation lights up your mind. When the day finally comes, you arrive, unpack, and feel good for a while. But by the third day, the thrill softens. The same beach that looked perfect in your imagination feels ordinary. You're already thinking about the next thing you'll do. The reward shadow has arrived. The promise of joy lasted longer than the joy itself. The same pattern shows up in smaller things. You buy a new gadget. You open the box, smell the packaging, press the buttons. For a few minutes, everything feels sharp and satisfying. Then the feeling slips away. The phone becomes just another object. The excitement moves on to something else. A new show, a new plan, a new idea. The shadow stretches behind every bright moment. It's not failure or boredom. It's a natural part of how reward systems reset. Dopamine drives survival through seeking. It evolved to keep people moving toward food, safety, connection. When the search ends, the brain shuts down the signal to rest and save energy. But in a modern world full of constant stimulation, that natural pause feels empty. The mind mistakes the drop in dopamine for something missing. It looks for a new target to chase, trying to replace the high that came before. Think about social media. You post something and feel a rush when the first few likes appear. For a moment, the validation feels real. Then it slows. The small thrill fades, and the urge to post again begins. Each hit of attention produces a short burst of chemical reward, followed by a longer shadow. The cycle keeps you engaged, not because it's deeply satisfying, but because the anticipation keeps returning. This isn't only about screens or shopping. It shows up in work, relationships, and creativity. A person might spend weeks preparing for a big event, a performance, a launch, a presentation. The day comes and it goes well. People applaud, give praise, and the person feels alive. But the next morning, something feels off. The energy that built up before the event has nowhere to go. The brain misses the chase. That emptiness isn't failure or depression. It's the shadow left behind when the dopamine wave recedes. You can see the same thing in learning. A student might study hard for an exam. The pressure builds motivation. The moment they finish, the release feels like relief, not joy. They expect satisfaction, but find quiet instead. The drive that kept them focused disappears because the goal is gone. The shadow settles in. It's why many people feel lost after completing big projects. They were fueled by pursuit, not completion. Even eating carries this pattern. The smell of food, the sight of it, the first bite, all trigger anticipation. Once you're full, the chemical signal stops. The pleasure drops faster than expected. That's why the last bites never taste as good as the first ones. The shadow isn't about disappointment. It's the mind returning to neutral. Reward shadows shape behavior because people learn to chase the feeling that comes before joy, not the joy itself. The brain starts linking happiness with the buildup, the messages, the waiting, the countdown. It confuses excitement for meaning. This is why anticipation can feel richer than fulfillment. The movie trailer feels thrilling. The movie itself might not. You might notice this after holidays or birthdays. The planning, the wrapping, the getting ready, it all builds energy. The day happens, it's fine, maybe even lovely. Then hours later, a strange sadness appears. The quiet feels heavier than usual. That's the absence of dopamine, not the absence of happiness. The shadow arrives because the system that pushed you forward has gone still. There's no way to remove this pattern. It's built into the brain's structure, but you can learn to see it. When you understand that joy fades by design, you stop expecting it to last forever. You notice the shadow as part of the same cycle. The rise, the peak, the drop, they all belong to the same rhythm. The promise and the fading light are one motion. When you stop fighting the shadow, you can appreciate the moments that cause it without needing them to stretch. You recognize that the thrill of looking forward, the calm of arrival, and the quiet after are all parts of the same process. The promise of joy may outlive the joy itself, but both belong to the same heartbeat that keeps you moving through the days. Invisible training happens every time you touch a screen. You might think you're just scrolling or checking something small, but your brain treats every action as practice. Each tap, each swipe, each refresh teaches it what to expect next and how to react. This is how habit forms, not through big decisions, but through repetition so frequent you stop noticing it. The mind learns by pairing cues and rewards. That loop runs quietly in the background while you move through your day. When you open a social app, your brain expects something new to appear. Sometimes it gets what it expects, sometimes it doesn't. That uncertainty strengthens the connection. The small hit of dopamine that follows tells the brain, this was worth doing. You didn't plan to train yourself to scroll, but that's exactly what's happening. Picture yourself waiting in line at a store. You take out your phone, open your favorite app, and start scrolling. Nothing urgent prompted that motion. You were just filling space. The brain notices the small relief that comes when you see something mildly interesting. It learns that boredom can be fixed by stimulation. The next time you feel a similar pause, the same cue appears. Reach for the phone. Without realizing it, you've built a loop. The phone becomes the tool for avoiding stillness. This learning is invisible because it feels harmless. Each moment of scrolling seems too small to matter, but the brain doesn't measure scale, it measures repetition. A behavior repeated hundreds of times becomes a pattern. What starts as entertainment becomes reflex. Even if you don't enjoy it, your brain still expects it. The cue fires automatically, and the body follows. Dopamine doesn't care about the value of what you're doing. It only marks actions that predict reward. So if checking for notifications sometimes feels good, the brain marks that pattern as useful. That's how reinforcement works. You might feel tired of it, even annoyed, but the brain doesn't measure emotion, it measures effect. If the loop provides relief, however small, it stays. You can see the same kind of training in other areas. Someone who checks email constantly might tell themselves it's about productivity, but often the act of checking is the reward. Each time the inbox updates, the brain releases a spark of anticipation. Even when there's no important message, the cycle continues. The person isn't choosing to check, they're responding to an internal cue. The behavior runs on its own. The same pattern drives the way people consume news or refresh dashboards. The action feels active, but it's actually reactive. Each click signals to the brain, this might matter. The result is a form of self-conditioning. The more you respond, the stronger the pathway grows. Neural circuits don't distinguish between meaningful and meaningless actions. They strengthen whatever you practice most. Consider how this shows up with online shopping. You browse a few items without buying anything. The act of browsing itself becomes soothing. The brain starts to associate the scrolling motion with small doses of pleasure. Later, when stress appears, the mind suggests the same behavior as relief. You open the app again, not to buy, but to feel the pattern. You've trained yourself to link uncertainty with consumption. This invisible learning doesn't just shape what you do, it shapes what feels normal. The more time you spend in fast loops, the more the brain expects immediate feedback. Long tasks start to feel heavy. Reading a book feels slow. Waiting for an answer feels uncomfortable. The neural system adapts to the rhythm you feed it. You may not notice the change, but your attention span does. Imagine sitting down to focus on a project. You open a blank document, ready to start, but within minutes, your hand moves toward your phone. That movement isn't a choice, it's a learned escape. Your brain has practiced seeking micro rewards for so long that stillness feels like friction. The screen promises something easier. Even if you don't act on it, the craving proves the training worked. Technology companies understand this process well. Interfaces are built to reward small actions. The color of a notification, the timing of an alert, the way a new post slides into view, each element is a training tool. The design keeps the loop alive by feeding the same cue and reward structure your brain evolved for survival. The goal isn't to make you happy, it's to make you repeat. But this type of training isn't limited to digital life. The same mechanisms shape your offline habits. You might stretch after sitting down because your body learned that the motion brings relief. You might pour coffee at the same time each morning because the smell signals comfort. Every repeated behavior teaches the brain what to expect next. The invisible training never stops. It simply shifts depending on what you feed it. Awareness begins when you notice the micro actions that run without thought. You can test this by pausing before you act. The next time you reach for your phone, stop halfway. Ask what you're looking for. Usually there's no clear answer. The gesture itself has become the reward. That pause interrupts the loop. It doesn't break it right away, but it makes it visible. Over time, you can retrain the same circuits. The brain doesn't erase habits, it overwrites them. When you replace one small action with another, you teach a new pattern. For instance, instead of opening an app during idle moments, take a slow breath or look around the room. The cue stays the same: boredom, waiting, stillness. But the response changes. The reward shifts from digital stimulation to calm awareness. It takes repetition to make that stick, but the same mechanism that built the old habit builds the new one. Every scroll, tap, and click is a lesson your brain records. Every pause, breath, and choice is another. The invisible classroom never closes. The only question is what you choose to teach it next. The wanting mind is always working. It hides behind your choices, whispering suggestions that feel like logic. You think you're deciding, but often you're following a thread of desire that began before the thought formed. The brain builds most actions on this quiet chemistry. Dopamine fires, signaling that something might be rewarding, and the mind starts to shape reasons around that feeling. What seems like a decision is often a justification for wanting. Picture walking into a store without a plan. You glance at a shelf, see a new gadget, and feel a small spark of interest. That spark appears before thought. It's not rational, it's chemical. The mind notices the spark and begins to build a story. I could use this, it might help with work, it's on sale. You think you're deciding, but you're explaining. The wanting came first, the logic came after. Dopamine creates this pull by connecting desire with prediction. It's not about pleasure itself, it's about expectation. The brain releases dopamine when it thinks something good might happen. That anticipation feels like energy, like focus. It makes you believe you're choosing with purpose. In reality, you're following the direction of the strongest signal. The wanting mind frames that signal as reason. Consider a person checking their phone for no clear reason. The cue arrives, a small vibration or just a moment of quiet, and the hand moves almost automatically. The brain says it's to check messages or stay informed, but those explanations appear after the motion starts. The real cause is the small wave of dopamine that rose in response to possibility. It's not the content that matters, it's the anticipation of what might be there. This pattern shows up in larger decisions too. Think of career moves, purchases, or relationships. Someone might say they want a certain job because it offers growth, security, or status. Those reasons sound logical, but often they serve a deeper feeling. The job represents reward, recognition, pride, or identity, and the mind dresses that feeling in practical language. The wanting hides inside the decision, wearing reason as a mask. The same mechanism shaped human survival. Early humans needed to seek food, shelter, and safety. Dopamine made those goals feel important. It pushed them to explore, to test, to risk. The wanting mind kept them alive, but in a modern setting, that same wiring can lead to constant restlessness. There's always another thing to chase, the next notification, the next task, the next improvement. The brain doesn't stop wanting, it just finds new directions to point that energy. You can see this in the way people chase productivity. The wanting mind treats activity as proof of purpose. When you check off a task, the brain releases a small dose of satisfaction. Then it fades, and the next task becomes urgent. The sense of control feels good, but it's another loop, desire disguised as decision-making. You think you're managing time, but often you're feeding the same craving that once kept you scrolling. Advertisers rely on this. They don't sell objects, they sell the story of fulfillment. A picture of someone smiling in a car doesn't appeal to reason, it triggers the wanting mind. The part that says, if I had that, I'd feel that way. The brain responds with dopamine, and then the conscious mind builds an explanation to match. You tell yourself it's about quality or value, but what you're really buying is the anticipation of contentment. Even in relationships, the wanting mind guides behavior. Early attraction feels like choice. You pick a person because they seem right, but the chemistry of connection starts beneath awareness. Dopamine rises with novelty, curiosity, and potential reward. The feeling of this person is special is a mix of biology and story. Over time, as novelty fades, the dopamine levels drop. That's when reasoning shifts. You start noticing flaws or differences that were invisible before. The wanting mind moves to new possibilities, searching again for that first spark. The same cycle appears in learning and creativity. A new idea feels exciting because it's uncertain. The mind surges with energy to explore it. Once you understand it, the excitement falls. Many people mistake that drop for loss of interest or failure, but it's just the chemistry resetting. The wanting mind thrives on pursuit, not possession. The moment something becomes familiar, the drive moves on. You can test this pattern in small ways. Next time you feel a strong urge to do something, to buy, to check, to reply, pause for a second. Ask what's driving it. You might notice the urge itself has no clear reason. The wanting mind doesn't need one. It only needs direction. The brain is built to move toward potential reward, not to question whether the reward matters. This is why restraint often feels uncomfortable. When you hold back from acting on desire, dopamine has nowhere to land. The energy builds with no outlet. It feels like tension or restlessness. That's why people say they just needed to do something, even if it didn't make sense. The wanting mind dislikes stillness. It prefers movement, even meaningless movement, to the feeling of waiting. Over time, invisible training shapes this cycle. Every time you act on an urge, the brain learns that wanting leads to relief. The relief becomes the new goal. You believe you're choosing, but the real decision already happened in the body. The mind just narrates it afterward, giving the illusion of control. Understanding this doesn't remove desire, but it changes your relationship to it. When you see wanting as part of how thought forms, you stop mistaking it for reason. You start to notice how often your mind builds stories to defend its cravings. The story always sounds smart, but it's built on feeling. The brain fires first, and the words follow. The wanting mind is ancient. It helped you survive. Now it helps you scroll, buy, chase, and plan. It can't tell the difference between survival and stimulation. Its job is to keep you moving towards something that feels like more. It turns desire into logic and calls it choice. But if you slow down long enough to watch it, you begin to see the gap between the urge and the reason. In that space, a small kind of freedom appears, not from wanting, but from mistaking it for truth. Pleasure echoes live inside memory. They linger after the reward fades, replaying the feeling long enough to make you want it again. The brain doesn't store joy the same way it stores facts. It saves the emotional trace, the signal that says, "This felt good, do it again." That echo often pulls harder than logic because it activates the same neural pathways that the original pleasure did. The experience ends, but the brain keeps the map. You can see this in the way people crave what they no longer enjoy. Someone might return to an old habit that no longer feels satisfying, scrolling late into the night, buying something they don't need, chasing the same type of relationship that keeps hurting them. Logic says to stop, but the memory of reward calls louder. Dopamine lights up at the thought of the pleasure that once was, not at what it is now. Imagine eating a dessert you loved as a kid. You remember how sweet it tasted, how it made you feel safe or cared for. Years later, you see it again in a store. The memory hits first. You buy it, take a bite, and realize it's just sugar and nostalgia. The taste doesn't match the expectation, but the craving came from the echo, not the food. The brain remembered the signal of joy, not the reality of it. Dopamine is a teacher that never forgets. It links pleasure to cues, the smell of a place, a certain song, a time of day. When the cue appears again, the brain fires as if the reward is about to return. That's why the smell of coffee can make you feel awake before you drink it, or why opening a social app can lift your mood before you see anything new. The memory of reward activates the system before the reward arrives. In that small space between cue and reality, logic has little power. The wanting mind runs on this same echo. It remembers the chase more than the catch. The first time you achieved something, an award, a milestone, a message from someone you admired, it felt alive. The second or third time, it felt smaller. The echo of the first reward still drives the action, even when the outcome doesn't match it. This is why people keep striving past satisfaction. The memory of joy carries more weight than the experience of it. You can see this in gambling. The first win creates a deep chemical imprint. The brain pairs the lights, sounds, and timing with that surge of reward. Later, when losses stack up, those same cues still activate dopamine. The player feels close to winning again, Even when logic says the odds haven't changed, the echo is stronger than reason because the brain is responding to history, not math. The same pattern happens in digital life. You post something online and get a rush from the first wave of likes or comments. That feedback loop leaves an imprint. Next time, before you post, the brain releases dopamine in anticipation of the same response. Even if it doesn't come, the memory keeps the behavior alive. The pleasure echo convinces you it will feel like before, so you try again. Over time, the activity becomes less about joy and more about chasing that first signal. This echo effect shapes more than habits, it shapes identity. People often describe themselves by the things that once made them feel good. I'm a runner, I'm a creator, I'm a fixer. Those labels grow from the memory of reward. When the pleasure fades, the identity remains, and so does the urge to return to what used to feel right. You might not enjoy the run anymore, but you still crave the feeling of being the person who does. The echo of pleasure becomes part of who you think you are. Logic tries to intervene by reminding you of outcomes. It lists costs, patterns, reasons to stop. But logic speaks in words, and the pleasure echo speaks in sensation. When the cue appears, the body reacts before thought can catch up. That's why people repeat behaviors they know are harmful. The echo feels like truth. The mind rationalizes after the fact, saying, I deserved it, or just this once. The chemical memory already decided. You can watch this process in small, ordinary choices. You check your phone, see a message that makes you smile, and later, without thinking, check again, hoping for the same feeling. Nothing new appears. But you keep checking because the echo of that first reward still hums beneath awareness. It's the same loop that keeps you opening the fridge, even when you're not hungry. The memory of past satisfaction calls louder than the logic that says there's nothing there. Dopamine's job is not to make you happy. Its job is to make you repeat what worked. The brain remembers the pathway that led to reward, not the quality of the reward itself. It's efficient, but not wise. Over time, that system can trick you into chasing the echo more than the experience. You might keep going back to something that no longer brings joy, simply because the memory of joy remains strong. This is why nostalgia feels powerful. Remembering an old song, a place, or a person can bring real emotion, even when the present version wouldn't. The memory carries the same neural signature as the original reward. The echo floods you with warmth. Though nothing in your environment has changed, the mind plays back its own chemistry like a recording, and the body listens. The pull of pleasure echoes isn't about weakness or lack of control. It's how the human brain balances efficiency with desire. It stores the feeling of reward as a shortcut, a way to find good things again without starting from zero. But in a world full of manufactured rewards, notifications, sugar, fast entertainment, those shortcuts lead to loops that logic can't untangle. The brain keeps chasing what once worked long after it stops working. The echo feels alive even when the joy is gone. Soft addiction doesn't look like danger. It doesn't destroy everything at once. It slides quietly into your day, disguised as something harmless. It's the extra scroll before bed, the second check of an app you already opened, the background noise you keep on, so silence doesn't stretch too far. You don't call it addiction because it doesn't crash your life. It just fills it. Soft addiction grows in the spaces where you think you're resting. It gives small comfort without real rest. Each moment feels like a choice, but it isn't. It's a reflex that learned to repeat itself. The reward is small, just enough to calm the mind for a few seconds, so it doesn't trigger alarm. The brain doesn't label it as danger, it labels it as relief. That's what makes it hard to see and harder to stop. Imagine someone working at a computer. Every few minutes, they switch tabs to check the news or scroll through social media. Each check takes 10 seconds, maybe less. They don't think it matters, but each switch releases a small pulse of dopamine. The brain learns that breaking focus brings tiny relief from tension. Over time, the pattern becomes automatic. The mind begins to crave the small release more than the satisfaction of finishing work. That's soft addiction at work, an invisible reward loop that teaches distraction. The same thing happens with background habits. The person who can't drive without music, can't eat without a show, or can't sit in silence without reaching for a phone. These aren't bad acts on their own. They become soft addictions when they start filling every quiet space. The brain forgets how to be still. It learns that silence equals discomfort, and discomfort must be fixed. But the more the habit repeats, the less comfort it brings. The reward gets smaller, and the craving grows stronger. Dopamine is the mechanism behind it. It's not pleasure itself. It's the signal that tells you something worth doing is nearby. When that signal fires often, the brain rewires itself around it. Soft addictions work by giving just enough stimulation to keep dopamine flowing, but never enough to satisfy it. They create a steady hum of wanting. You don't feel high or fulfilled. You feel slightly restless all the time. Picture sitting on the couch after work. You open a streaming app and scroll for 20 minutes before choosing something. That time feels like unwinding, but it's not rest. It's low-level stimulation. Your brain releases small bursts of anticipation as you look for the perfect thing to watch. By the time you settle, the reward system is already tired. The show itself doesn't satisfy as much as the act of choosing. You go to bed later than planned, not because you felt joy, but because you didn't feel quite done. Soft addiction often hides inside routines that seem productive. Checking messages to stay connected, reading news to stay informed, keeping up with notifications to stay ready. Each justification sounds reasonable because it once served a real purpose. But when the behavior continues after the purpose fades, it becomes reinforcement without reason. The brain learns the pattern, not the intention. A common sign of soft addiction is the loss of choice. You tell yourself you'll take a break from screens or sugar or constant noise, but an hour later, you're back. You didn't decide to give in. You just found yourself there. That moment of drifting is the hallmark of soft addiction. The behavior moves faster than awareness. The world makes this easy. Technology companies, advertisers, and media platforms design experiences to trigger these loops. Infinite scroll, autoplay, instant replies, all built to remove natural stopping points. They keep the brain in motion, tricking it into thinking something new is always close. But the same rule applies offline. A person can be hooked on busyness, on multitasking, on planning every moment. The addiction isn't always digital. It's the constant need for stimulation. Soft addiction feeds on low resistance. Because it doesn't cause pain or chaos, it escapes scrutiny. You can rationalize it as normal life, but underneath, the brain loses tolerance for quiet. When nothing happens, you feel uneasy. That unease pushes you back toward the small reward. The more you feed it, the more silence feels like deprivation. You can see it in how people handle waiting. At a stoplight, in a line, at the table, hands reach for phones. The pause that once belonged to thought or observation now belongs to microstimulation. The habit is not about interest or information. It's about avoiding stillness. The moment without input feels wrong. Soft addiction often spreads across behaviors. Someone might start by checking messages, then snack more, then browse more, then multitask during every quiet stretch. Each habit reinforces the next. The brain seeks a steady rhythm of low-level pleasure. It doesn't want intensity. It wants continuity. That's why quitting one habit often uncovers another. The chemistry behind them is the same. Breaking the loop begins with seeing it. The first step isn't to stop, it's to notice. Watch how often your hand moves toward a device without instruction. Notice how quickly you feel boredom. The goal isn't guilt, it's recognition. Awareness brings the behavior into the light, where it stops running unchecked. The brain can't unlearn what it doesn't see. When you start paying attention, you notice how small these habits really are and how deep they run. You begin to see how often you choose distraction over rest, how often you feed the system that keeps you slightly unsatisfied. That's what soft addiction does. It trades presence for comfort and gives neither in full. It keeps you moving, but not forward. It keeps you satisfied enough not to stop, and restless enough not to feel done. The brain learns from repetition, not intensity. Every tap, every check, every glance is practice, over months and years. Those small lessons build invisible structure. The result is not dependence in the dramatic sense, but a quiet erosion of choice. You do what feels automatic because the system has been trained to run that way. Soft addiction doesn't steal control, it wears it down. It's easy to mistake this for weakness. It's not. It's biology doing its job in an environment designed to exploit it. The cues are everywhere, and the rewards come fast. The habits form faster than you can reason with them. You don't need to crash to be caught. Sometimes being slightly off balance all the time is enough. That's what soft addiction is, the gentle gravity that pulls you without force, one small repetition at a time. The brain loves feedback. It treats every sign of progress as proof that things are moving forward, even when they aren't. A blinking notification, a rising number, a check mark on a to-do list. These small signals make us feel like we're improving. They trigger the same reward systems that real growth does. The problem is that feedback doesn't always equal progress. Sometimes it only feels that way. That's the feedback mirage, the illusion of movement without change. Imagine opening a fitness app. You close your rings, hit your daily step count, and watch the numbers rise. The data looks good. You feel accomplished. But the feeling might come from the chart, not from health. The brain releases dopamine when it sees measurable progress, because it interprets numbers as proof of success. Yet if the numbers are shallow, if you're walking in circles or cutting corners, the progress isn't real. The feedback still rewards you. The brain learns from the signal, not the truth. This is how digital design keeps attention. Apps and platforms use small bursts of feedback, likes, views, scores, to tell you that what you're doing matters. You post something and see a number climb. That number feels like validation. It's not proof of meaning or improvement. It's just response. Still, the brain treats it as progress. The dopamine spike encourages you to repeat the behavior, even if it leaves you empty later. The mirage works because the reward comes fast and the cost shows slowly. Feedback loops shape behavior through repetition. Each cue and response teaches the nervous system what to value. When the brain receives positive feedback, it strengthens the action that led to it. This happens even when the feedback is meaningless. You might refresh a page, see a new notification, and feel a short pulse of satisfaction. The brain links the act of refreshing with reward. Soon you start doing it without thinking. The loop continues because the illusion of progress feels almost as good as the real thing. Consider how this works with productivity. Many people keep detailed lists of tasks, color-coded and organized. Checking an item off feels like success. The motion itself becomes addictive. Sometimes, people start adding easy tasks to the list just to cross them off. Check email, refill coffee, adjust calendar. Each checkmark brings a sense of completion, but the real work remains undone. The brain still celebrates. It doesn't know the difference between meaningful progress and symbolic progress. It just knows that something got marked as finished. In video games, the same principle appears as leveling systems and progress bars. Players get constant feedback, sounds, flashes, numbers increasing, that signal improvement. Even when the goals are repetitive, the brain responds to the pattern of reward. The dopamine system evolved to push humans toward goals like food or safety. Games hijack that system with digital milestones. The feedback feels satisfying even when the stakes are imaginary. The brain treats illusion as experience. This pattern carries over into learning. Watching a tutorial or reading about a skill can make you feel smarter. You absorb the information and imagine applying it later. That imagination produces a small dopamine release, the feeling of, I've learned something. But without practice, the knowledge fades. The feedback came from understanding the idea, not from using it. The brain rewards comprehension even when competence hasn't formed. You feel progress without gaining ability. Social media builds on this same pattern. Every view, like, or follower acts as a metric. The numbers rise and you feel momentum. But those signals don't always reflect connection or meaning. They measure reaction, not depth. The mirage appears when the brain equates reaction with growth. You feel seen, but not necessarily known. You feel busy, but not fulfilled. The feedback convinces you that motion equals value. The feedback mirage also appears in professional settings. People chase metrics, emails sent, meetings held, reports delivered, as proof of productivity. The system rewards visible activity more than thoughtful progress. Over time, teams learn to optimize for what gets measured, not for what matters. The same chemistry drives it. Each small approval, each data point, each chart trending upward feels like success. The dopamine hit reinforces the illusion. It's not only digital life that produces this pattern. The human brain has always looked for signs of success. Farmers watched growth in fields, hunters read tracks, elders counted stones. The difference now is the speed and volume of feedback. It never stops. You can track your steps, your spending, your sleep, your attention span. The constant measurement keeps the dopamine loop active, rewarding the act of monitoring more than the act of living. Think about checking analytics. Whether it's views on a post or money in an account, the urge to look again grows even when you know nothing has changed. Each time you check, the possibility of improvement triggers dopamine. When the number moves, the brain celebrates. When it doesn't, the brain still waits for the next chance. The behavior becomes self-reinforcing. The feedback itself becomes the goal. You can see this mirrored in the classroom. Students learn to chase grades instead of understanding. Each score is feedback, and the reward system reacts. When the grade drops, motivation drops. When it rises, dopamine spikes. Learning becomes secondary to scoring. The mirage teaches students to optimize for external signals rather than internal mastery. The illusion works because feedback feels like proof of control. It tells you that your effort matters. Even false progress offers comfort. That comfort keeps you returning to the same patterns, refreshing, checking, measuring, hoping for the next small hit of validation. It's the same mechanism that drives gambling, social scrolling, and endless productivity cycles. The feedback loop feeds itself. The brain's reward system can't tell illusion from substance. It only tracks prediction and payoff. When the cue matches expectation, dopamine fires. Whether the outcome is real growth or just a glowing number doesn't matter. The chemistry is the same. That's why the mirage can feel so convincing. You believe you're advancing because the body reacts as if you are. The signal of progress replaces progress itself. In the feedback mirage, motion replaces meaning. You move, click, track, record, and repeat. The reward system stays active, whispering that everything you do counts for something. The truth sits beneath that hum. The brain learns even from the illusion of progress. And once it learns, it doesn't forget. Every habit you have runs on a quiet loop. It begins with a cue, builds into a craving, turns into a response, and ends in relief. That cycle repeats hundreds of times a day. You notice only a few of them. The rest happen in the background, shaping what you do and how you feel. The loop is simple, but it explains more about behavior than motivation or willpower ever could. A cue is the signal that starts the process. It can be anything: a time of day, a place, an emotion, a smell. The cue doesn't force action, but it opens the door. The craving follows. It's not a craving for the thing itself, but for the feeling that the thing promises. Then comes the response, the behavior meant to get the reward. When it works, the brain records relief. The relief teaches the brain that this pattern solves a problem. The next time the cue appears, the loop starts again. Imagine sitting on your couch after a long day. You feel tired and slightly restless. That's the cue. You want comfort. That's the craving. You grab your phone and start scrolling. That's the response. You feel distracted for a moment, maybe entertained. That's the relief. The loop is complete. Your brain learns that when restlessness appears, distraction brings calm. The next night, the same feeling comes, and you reach for your phone without thought. The cue doesn't cause the habit. It triggers the memory of relief. Every loop, no matter how small, trains the brain to predict outcomes. The system doesn't ask if the relief is healthy or useful. It only records the connection between discomfort and the behavior that eases it. That's why some habits feel automatic. They were practiced so many times that the prediction now fires before awareness. You don't decide to reach for coffee in the morning. The smell, the kitchen light, and the routine all cue the loop. The loop doesn't depend on pleasure. Many habits repeat even when they don't feel good. Someone might bite their nails, argue online, or overthink the same worry every night. These actions still offer relief. They satisfy the craving to do something about a feeling. The brain rewards action over stillness. As long as the loop ends in any reduction of tension, it stays. Cues come in many forms. Physical cues are things like locations, sounds, or routines. Emotional cues are stronger. They come from boredom, anxiety, or fatigue. Each emotion signals an unmet need. The brain doesn't distinguish between hunger for food and hunger for distraction. it just looks for the fastest way to stop the feeling. Cravings rise from that same place. They're not about wanting the habit itself. They're about wanting to change an inner state. Think of someone who checks email the moment they wake up. The cue is waking. The craving is to feel productive or in control. The response is opening the inbox. The relief comes when new messages appear, and the brain interprets that as proof of importance. Over time, the morning cue automatically leads to the response. Even on weekends or vacations, the loop runs. The act becomes less about communication and more about regulation. The same structure drives eating, scrolling, smoking, and worrying. The pattern is universal because the brain's reward system runs on prediction and relief. Dopamine fires not only when we get what we want, but when we think we're about to get it. The cue predicts the reward, and that prediction becomes its own source of pleasure. The moment relief arrives, dopamine drops. That drop is what creates the sense of calm that follows, but it also sets up the next craving. The cycle turns again. You can see the loop at work in modern design. Notifications, recommendations, and refresh buttons all act as cues. Each one promises a small reward, something new to see, someone to respond to, a small sign of connection. The craving builds instantly. The response is the tap or the scroll. The relief comes when something appears, even if it's trivial. The brain reports success. It doesn't matter that the satisfaction fades quickly. The pattern repeats anyway. Breaking a loop doesn't mean fighting the craving. Craving is built into the system. The only way to change it is to interrupt the sequence before the response. That means noticing the cue when it appears. The moment you recognize it, you slow the pattern long enough to see it happening. The cue might be boredom, fatigue, or stress. Naming it gives you space to choose a different response. The brain still wants relief, but you can teach it new ways to find it. For example, someone who eats out of stress might pause when the cue, tension in the body, appears. Instead of heading to the kitchen, they take a short walk or stretch. At first, the relief won't come as quickly. The old habit still holds more power, but with repetition, the new pattern begins to replace the old one. The cue remains, but the response shifts. Over time, the craving rewires around the new behavior. Noticing the loop doesn't stop it immediately. Awareness works slowly. Each time you see the cue and resist the automatic response, you weaken the old association. Each time you follow the loop unconsciously, you strengthen it. The brain learns whichever pattern you repeat most often. You can track these loops across your day. You wake up and crave stimulation, phone. You sit down to work and crave ease, distraction. You feel anxious and crave relief, checking, eating, scrolling, pacing. The cycle moves like a background hum, touching everything you do. It's quiet, predictable, and deeply human. Cues trigger craving. Craving drives response. Response delivers relief. Relief teaches the brain what to do next time. That simple structure explains why so much of life feels repetitive. You're not weak or lazy. You're following the loops your brain has learned. They're not obvious, but they run the show. And every repetition teaches the system to expect the next one. Every vibration, every ping, every red dot on a screen delivers a small dose of dopamine. It doesn't feel like much, but it's enough to train the brain. Over time, those tiny hits of anticipation turn into a rhythm that shapes attention. Each notification says the same quiet thing. Something might be waiting for you. The uncertainty keeps the loop alive. It's not the message that matters, it's the possibility of one. The modern brain lives on digital drips. They come through phones, computers, watches, and speakers. Each sound and flash acts as a cue. The cue sparks curiosity. Curiosity becomes craving. The response is quick. You check, swipe, or tap. Then comes the relief. That relief feels like control, but it's chemistry. Dopamine fires in the gap between wanting and getting. It's a system built to keep you reaching. Imagine sitting at your desk. You're focused on a task when your phone lights up. You don't know what the notification is, but your hand moves toward it. For a split second, you feel excitement. Maybe it's a friend, a headline, a sale, or a simple alert from an app you forgot you downloaded. It doesn't matter. You look, you see, and the feeling fades. Then, almost immediately, you wait for the next one. The loop is invisible, but it's there every time. Dopamine is not pleasure itself. It's the signal of potential reward. It evolved to help early humans seek food, safety, and connection. When the environment provided scarce rewards, the system kept people exploring. But in the digital world, the supply of small rewards is endless. A screen gives you hundreds of cues every hour, each one promising something new. The brain keeps firing, searching, predicting. The result is constant anticipation without satisfaction. Technology companies learned how powerful that loop could be. Notifications are not random. They're engineered to keep you engaged. A red badge on an app isn't chosen for design alone. It's chosen because red signals urgency to the human brain. The small delay before a message appears, the animation of dots while someone types, the buzz that signals maybe now, each element triggers a microdose of dopamine. You don't need a big reward to stay hooked. You just need uncertainty. Variable reinforcement is the term researchers use for this kind of conditioning. When a reward is unpredictable, the brain works harder to get it. Slot machines use the same system. You pull a lever, not because you expect to win, but because you might. The chance is enough. Every notification works the same way. Sometimes it's something good. Sometimes it's nothing. The inconsistency keeps you checking. Consider how this feels across a day. You wake up and reach for your phone before getting out of bed. The first drip comes from overnight messages or headlines. You open a few apps, scan the surface of information, and move on. Each act produces a pulse of stimulation. None of it lasts. The morning starts not with thought, but with reaction. The brain learns that waking means checking. The loop continues through breakfast, work, and even quiet moments. Silence feels strange without the next small buzz. The body responds too. Each time you check a device, your nervous system adjusts. The brief excitement raises heart rate and sharpens focus. The crash that follows brings a subtle low. You reach for the next drip to even it out. The pattern becomes self-sustaining. What begins as curiosity turns into regulation. You use the phone not for connection, but for balance. The system becomes its own supply. Digital drips don't need to feel dramatic to be powerful. A single ping can interrupt a train of thought or change a mood. Over time, the interruptions shape how long you can stay focused. The brain begins to expect new input at short intervals. Tasks without feedback start to feel dull. Reading, thinking, or sitting still feel heavier than before. The constant drip rewires attention around novelty instead of depth. You can see this in group settings. A meeting pauses as people glance at their phones. Conversations split as someone checks an alert. No one plans it, but the loop runs underneath social life. Each person's dopamine system hums in sync with their devices, waiting for the next cue. The shared silence between alerts feels awkward. Stillness feels incomplete. The pull grows stronger when emotions are involved. A lonely moment makes you check for messages. A stressful day makes you scroll for distraction. Each time, the brain learns that discomfort can be eased by digital noise. Relief becomes linked to stimulation. The next time discomfort appears, the same craving follows. The habit builds slowly, reinforced by small, harmless acts. By the time you notice it, the pattern feels normal. This cycle doesn't rely on pleasure. Most people don't enjoy the feeling of being glued to a screen. They keep doing it because it keeps them balanced between small highs and small lows. The dopamine system isn't chasing joy, it's chasing prediction. Every notification is a coin flip the brain can't stop betting on. It's not about what you find, it's about what might appear. Imagine a world without these constant cues. You'd have to look for stimulation in larger, slower ways. Conversation, movement, reflection. The brain would adjust, but at first, it would feel like withdrawal. The silence would highlight how many times you reach for your device without reason. Each reach is a learned reflex, the product of thousands of repetitions. Every check trains the next one. The digital drip works because it gives the illusion of control. You believe you're checking by choice, but the chemistry decides first. The sound or the light cues the craving. The response happens before thought. The relief feels like decision, but it's habit. That's the quiet truth beneath the noise. Each notification teaches the brain that a small hit of stimulation is always available. One buzz, one glance, one drop of dopamine at a time. The comfort cycle is the strange way people stay close to what hurts them. It's not because they enjoy pain. It's because the familiar feels safe, even when it isn't. The brain prefers patterns it knows over peace it can't predict. Familiar discomfort feels like home. Unfamiliar calm feels like risk. That's how the cycle begins. The brain is built for survival, not happiness. It looks for consistency and control. When something repeats, the brain learns it. That pattern becomes comfort, even if it's unpleasant. If you've lived with stress, you adapt to stress. If you've lived with chaos, quiet can feel wrong. Peace feels like a void, and the mind fills it with the only thing it knows: tension. Imagine someone who checks their phone every few minutes. They complain that it makes them anxious, that the constant updates exhaust them. But when they try to stop, they feel worse. The silence feels empty. Their hand twitches toward the phone. It's not the notifications they crave. It's the sense of motion they've trained themselves to need. The cycle holds because anxiety has become familiar. The same thing happens in relationships. A person might stay in a partnership that drains them. They know it's not good, but they also know how it works. They understand the rhythm of argument and apology. The tension feels predictable. Starting over feels dangerous. The brain sees the unknown as a threat, even when logic says it's better. Familiar discomfort feels like control. This pattern shows up in small moments too. Someone might procrastinate on work. They hate the last-minute stress, but rely on it to focus. The pressure becomes part of their routine. When they try to start early, it feels wrong. Too easy, too calm. The brain has linked productivity with panic. The body waits for the rush of cortisol to signal that it's time to move. Peace feels suspicious. Dopamine plays a role in this. It doesn't just drive pleasure. It also reinforces behavior that reduces tension. If arguing brings temporary relief, the brain rewards the argument. If doom scrolling numbs boredom, the brain records that as success. Each small act of relief becomes proof that discomfort is useful. Over time, the brain pairs calm with vulnerability and agitation with safety. It's an odd form of conditioning. The nervous system learns to self-soothe with the very thing that causes distress. The comfort cycle often forms early. A child who grows up around unpredictability learns to stay alert. They read tone, expression, and silence for clues. That vigilance becomes a habit. As an adult, they find it hard to rest. Stillness triggers the same alarm that once kept them safe. Peace feels like letting their guard down, so they fill quiet with tasks, screens, or background noise. The behavior doesn't bring joy, but it feels right. This cycle is reinforced by modern life. The world rewards stimulation. Notifications, deadlines, and updates keep the nervous system running high. You feel uneasy when you're not checking something or fixing something. That unease pushes you back into the loop. The brain tells you that action equals safety, even if the action solves nothing. Familiar discomfort keeps you busy enough not to face stillness. You can see this cycle in how people manage rest. Many claim to want more downtime, but when they get it, they reach for distraction. A quiet evening without screens or noise feels uncomfortable. The body expects background tension, a buzz of activity, a low hum of alertness. Without it, the mind searches for something to do. The cycle completes itself. The comfort cycle also hides inside self-talk. People often repeat critical thoughts, not because they believe them, but because they're familiar. The brain treats familiar words like background noise. When positive thoughts appear, they sound foreign, even fake. It's not that optimism feels wrong. It's that the nervous system doesn't recognize it. The old discomfort feels more natural, so the mind returns to it. Consider someone who finishes a big project. They feel proud for a moment, then uneasy. The relief fades fast. Instead of resting, they look for the next thing to fix. That drive isn't ambition, it's habit. Their brain associates peace with the end of usefulness. Doing equals safety. Stopping feels like danger. They've learned to keep discomfort alive as proof of purpose. Breaking this loop starts with noticing it. You can't force comfort to feel safe, but you can observe the reflex that resists it. When stillness feels uneasy, it's not failure, it's biology. The brain hasn't learned that calm can be predictable too. Every time you stay in that unease a little longer, you teach it something new. The reward system begins to rewire. The cycle has many forms. Some people chase emotional noise, arguments, overthinking, constant worry, because silence feels strange. Others cling to busyness, afraid of the space where reflection might live. Even habits like overworking, overchecking, or overhelping can be disguised versions of the same loop. They all come from the same chemical lesson: discomfort equals safety. Imagine sitting alone with no screen, no sound. At first, your mind races. You think of things to check or fix. The quiet feels heavy. But if you stay, the noise begins to settle. The heart slows, the muscles unclench, the breath deepens. This is unfamiliar peace, the kind that takes time to trust. It's not exciting, but it's stable. It doesn't depend on crisis. The nervous system doesn't know how to live there yet, but it can learn. The comfort cycle is powerful because it pretends to protect you. It keeps you near what you know, even when it limits you. The brain mistakes repetition for safety. and it resists anything that threatens that pattern. Peace feels dangerous because it requires surrender. Discomfort feels reliable because it requires control. Between those two lies the space where real calm begins, the kind that doesn't come from escape, but from letting go of what used to feel safe. The variable reward trap is the oldest trick in the brain. It hides inside machines, apps, games, and habits that promise just one more. It's the slot machine built into everyday life. The system works because it's unpredictable. The brain reacts more strongly to uncertain rewards than to guaranteed ones. When you never know when the good thing will come, you keep reaching for it. Every swipe, every refresh, every roll of digital dice gives you a small taste of maybe. The core of the trap is variability. Dopamine responds to surprise. When a reward appears at random intervals, the brain releases more dopamine than when it appears on schedule. This makes variable rewards more powerful than consistent ones. They turn normal behaviors into compulsive ones. You might not even enjoy what you're doing, but you'll keep doing it because the next outcome could be better. Imagine checking your phone for messages. Most times, there's nothing new. But every once in a while, there's something exciting. A funny meme, a compliment, a chance. That randomness keeps you hooked. The brain learns that checking sometimes works, so it keeps trying. The same principle built casinos, social media, and every pull to refresh feature. The slot machine doesn't need flashing lights. It just needs uncertainty. Consider how often you refresh a page, check your inbox, or glance at your notifications. Each time, you expect something small but rewarding. You don't know when it will come, so you keep looking. That's variable reinforcement. The system rewards persistence, not satisfaction. You can't predict the reward, so your mind stays alert. You feel restless until you check, and relieved when you do. The relief feels like control, but it's only the release of tension the system created. In psychology, this pattern is called an intermittent reinforcement schedule. It's the same schedule used in experiments with animals. When a rat presses a lever and gets food every time, it presses until full, then stops. But when the food appears only sometimes, the rat keeps pressing long after it's hungry. It presses harder, faster, and longer. The uncertainty keeps it working. Human behavior follows the same curve. The less predictable the outcome, the stronger the drive to keep trying. The variable reward trap also shapes social behavior. Every like, comment, or follow functions as a small, unpredictable prize. You post something and wait. Sometimes the response is instant. Sometimes it takes hours. Sometimes it's silence. That variation keeps you engaged. You tell yourself you're staying connected, but you're waiting for your next reward. The pattern repeats because the brain rewards anticipation more than achievement. Games use this system openly. You open a chest, spin a wheel, or earn random loot. The unpredictable outcome triggers a surge of dopamine, even when the reward is meaningless. The brain can't tell the difference between digital chance and real opportunity. It just knows something unexpected might happen. That's why so many games don't end, they loop. The design keeps the brain chasing uncertainty instead of closure. The same loop runs through productivity tools. Each time you refresh your email, there might be a message that changes your day. Most of the time there isn't, but that rare occasion when there is keeps you checking. The reinforcement schedule is invisible, but the chemistry is real. Dopamine rises in expectation, drops in disappointment, and spikes again with the next cue. The pattern becomes its own motivation. Variable rewards don't always involve screens. They show up in relationships too. A partner who alternates between affection and withdrawal creates the same loop. The unpredictability keeps the other person engaged, waiting for the next sign of warmth. The emotional reward becomes more powerful because it's inconsistent. The brain records the uncertainty as significance. You think it's love, but it's intermittent reinforcement disguised as connection. Even work can turn into a slot machine. You send a proposal and wait for a reply. You check metrics, hoping for a rise. You publish something and refresh to see who noticed. The pattern of waiting and small wins shapes focus. Progress feels exciting, not because of meaning, but because it's measurable and uncertain. The brain stays hooked on the possibility of improvement, not the improvement itself. Breaking the variable reward trap starts with noticing how many of your actions depend on maybe. You check, swipe, refresh, and hope. Each act promises relief from anticipation, not from need. The loop trains your nervous system to expect stimulation. When it doesn't come, you feel low. The silence between rewards feels heavier than it should. That's withdrawal from uncertainty. It's the mind adjusting to stillness after constant chasing. Imagine turning off notifications. At first, your hand still moves toward the phone. The craving stays, even without a cue. That's the leftover tension of the reward system. It takes time for the brain to unlearn the pattern. The goal isn't to remove pleasure. It's to stop mistaking unpredictability for importance. Predictable calm feels dull at first because it lacks the chemical spikes the variable schedule created. The trap works because it doesn't feel forced. You choose to check, you choose to scroll, you choose to wait, but the chemistry underneath runs on its own. The cue triggers craving. The craving drives the response. The reward, when it arrives, cements the loop. The brain doesn't know the difference between a slot machine and a screen. It only knows that something might happen next, and that maybe feels worth chasing. Every pull to refresh is a lever. Every notification is a coin drop. Every scroll is another spin. The machine hums quietly in your hand, waiting for your touch. It doesn't need to promise much, just maybe, and maybe is enough. The brain rewards movement towards something it wants. It uses dopamine as the signal. That signal feels good, so we call it happiness. But dopamine doesn't create joy. It creates pursuit. It makes you reach, not rest. That's the sweet deception, the sense that pleasure and happiness are the same thing. They feel similar, but they move in opposite directions. One pushes you forward, the other lets you stop. Dopamine's job is to predict reward. It fires when you expect something good to happen, not when it actually does. The chemical rises in anticipation and falls once the reward arrives. That drop leaves a small gap, the feeling that something is missing. You chase again to fill it. The mind mistakes the chase for satisfaction because the pursuit feels alive. Stillness, by comparison, feels empty. That's why people keep scrolling, buying, checking, and reaching long after they found what they wanted. Imagine ordering a package online. You feel excited when you click buy. You picture what it will be like when it arrives. That's dopamine at work. Your brain rewarding you for the pursuit. When the package shows up, you feel good for a few minutes. Then the feeling fades. You move on to the next thing to look forward to. The pattern repeats. The excitement came not from having, but from expecting. The same thing happens with attention. You open a social app and start scrolling. Each post brings a small burst of possibility. Maybe the next one will make you laugh or feel connected. You keep going because the system rewards the anticipation, not the content. By the time you put the phone down, you don't feel happier, just tired. The brain got its hits of dopamine, but the rest of you didn't get peace. This is why pleasure feels like progress but doesn't satisfy. The system evolved for survival. It pushed early humans to find food, warmth, and connection. When they succeeded, dopamine dropped so they'd start again. That drop wasn't punishment. It was design. But in a world of endless stimulation, the same system now keeps you chasing artificial goals. You don't hunt for what you need. You hunt for what feels rewarding to hunt. Think of someone watching the number of likes rise on a post. Each new notification gives a jolt of satisfaction, small but distinct. The moment the number stops moving, the feeling fades, the craving returns. They post again. The process is self-sustaining. The mind learns that the signal of potential reward feels like meaning. The truth is quieter. Meaning doesn't release dopamine, it stabilizes it. But stability feels flat compared to the rush of pursuit. Dopamine is not evil. It teaches the brain what to repeat. It keeps you curious and ambitious. Without it, you'd never explore or grow. The problem comes when every small spark becomes a goal in itself. The more often you trigger the system, the less powerful each reward becomes. The baseline drops. You need more to feel normal. The chase becomes background noise. Even moments of real joy struggle to rise above it. You can see this in how people treat rest. A free evening should feel relaxing, but for many, it feels uneasy. Without constant input, dopamine levels flatten, and the brain feels bored. The urge to check a screen or plan something new appears within minutes. That's the mind trying to restart the chemical rhythm. Peace feels dull because the system has adapted to peaks. The more stimulation you seek, the harder it becomes to feel calm. Consider someone who achieves a long-term goal, a promotion, a milestone, a purchase. For a moment, they feel high. Then a strange emptiness appears. The brain already reduced dopamine levels in response to the expected reward. What once felt like arrival now feels like a void. Many respond by setting a new goal immediately, not out of ambition, but out of discomfort. Stillness feels like loss when the chase has been the only constant. Marketing, entertainment, and design use this system expertly. The promise of reward sells better than the reward itself. Ads don't show people owning something. They show people about to enjoy it. The same pattern drives games, streaming services, and even productivity apps. They all feed anticipation, progress bars, countdowns, streaks. Each cue says, "You're almost there." The brain loves almost, it hates done. Even small pleasures work this way. The first bite of dessert lights up the brain. The second is less powerful. By the fifth, the dopamine response is nearly gone. Yet you keep eating, hoping to recover that first spark. The sweet deception lies in thinking that more of the same stimulus will bring the same feeling. It won't. The reward system tires quickly, but the craving doesn't stop. This chemistry shapes emotion too. Many confuse excitement for happiness because excitement feels vivid. It lights up the same circuits dopamine uses. True contentment, by contrast, feels quiet. It lacks peaks. It doesn't demand movement. For a brain trained on constant stimulation, that quiet feels unnatural, even boring. So you chase excitement again, mistaking the rush for joy. Dopamine also shapes how memory works. The brain remembers the anticipation of reward more strongly than the reward itself. You might recall how it felt to wait for a message or plan a trip, but not the calm of actually receiving or arriving. That selective memory reinforces the chase. The past looks brighter in your mind because dopamine colored it. The present feels muted by comparison. A sweet deception works because it uses the same circuit that once kept humans alive. It still tells you to move, to reach, to try. The problem isn't that you feel it. It's that the modern world gives it no limits. You can chase endlessly without arriving anywhere. The dopamine system can't close its own loop. It was built for scarcity, not abundance. When everything offers a hit, nothing satisfies. The chase feels like happiness, but it's only momentum. The brain is a creature of pattern. It loves what it knows, even when the known is dull. Predictable pleasure feels safer than surprise. It may not excite as much, but it comforts in ways newness never can. The mind doesn't chase novelty for its own sake. It looks for something that matches its expectations of reward. When the pattern repeats, the brain relaxes. When it breaks, the brain tenses. Predictability feels like peace. Dopamine plays a quiet role in this. It fires not just for reward, but for prediction. When the brain guesses what will happen, and it happens, dopamine rises. The system reads that match as success. You feel a small spark of satisfaction, not from the pleasure itself, but from being right about it. The brain loves to be right. That's why routine comforts. The same breakfast, the same route, the same song on repeat. Each one delivers the pleasure of prediction fulfilled. Imagine someone who watches the same show every night. They've seen every episode before, but that's the point. The jokes land exactly when expected. The rhythm never changes. It's not exciting, but it's soothing. Their brain knows what's coming, and that knowledge keeps stress low. The reward isn't the story, it's the certainty. The same rule explains why people return to familiar foods or habits. You might crave variety in theory, but when you're tired, you choose the meal you know will taste good. The brain doesn't want to gamble on disappointment. Predictable pleasure feels efficient. It saves mental energy. It guarantees a small, steady return. Novelty, by contrast, requires risk. It could be better, but it could also be worse. The reward system prefers the sure thing. Predictable pleasure also explains nostalgia. The songs you loved years ago still hit the same way because your brain remembers every beat. The anticipation builds at the right moments. Each note lands on time. The pleasure comes not from surprise, but from recognition. It's like meeting an old friend. You already know how it will go, and that's what makes it good. The comfort lies in the match between memory and present experience. This pattern shows up in social life too. You tend to feel most comfortable around people whose reactions you can predict, even if they're not always kind. Familiarity gives the illusion of safety. A predictable friend feels easier to handle than an unpredictable stranger. The brain ranks known discomfort above uncertain peace. That's why people often stay in routines, jobs, or relationships that no longer make them happy. The brain values the comfort of knowing how things will unfold over the challenge of change. Marketers understand this instinct. They build products that feel new but work within familiar frameworks. Sequels, reboots, and repeated designs all sell because the balance between predictability and freshness keeps dopamine flowing. The brain gets to feel both safe and curious. Too much novelty overwhelms. Too much sameness bores. The sweet spot is predictable pleasure, new enough to engage, known enough to relax. Consider the way social media feeds are structured. They blend the familiar with the unexpected. You see posts from people you know, mixed with new content. Each scroll gives a predictable rhythm, known structure, unknown outcome. The brain learns to expect satisfaction from the act of scrolling itself. The pleasure comes not from what you find, but from the reliable pattern of seeking and finding something. The design rewards prediction more than discovery. Even creativity relies on predictability. Songs with repeating patterns or symmetrical rhythms activate the brain's reward centers more than random sounds. You enjoy art that feels balanced, writing that flows as expected, and endings that make sense. The satisfaction you feel isn't just emotional, it's chemical. The brain releases dopamine when it recognizes order. Predictable pleasure signals that the world still follows rules you understand. But predictability can also trap you. Once the brain finds a reliable source of small rewards, it resists leaving it. A person might scroll, snack, or watch the same shows not because they love them, but because they know exactly what kind of comfort they'll get. The system trades depth for certainty. Each repetition gives less joy, but keeps the same shape of relief. The pattern becomes self-protective. This is why breaking habits feels uncomfortable, even when the change is positive. The brain isn't resisting growth, it's resisting unpredictability. When you stop checking your phone first thing in the morning, your brain misses not the content, but the certainty. It knew how the loop worked. Cue, check, reward. Removing that loop feels like a loss, even if it opens space for peace. You can see this in emotional habits too. Some people carry constant worry or irritation, not because they want to, but because it's familiar. A calm mind feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. The body waits for the next problem to appear. Predictable discomfort feels easier to manage than unpredictable calm. The brain mistakes repetition for stability. It confuses the known with the good. Dopamine reinforces this by rewarding successful prediction, not quality of outcome. When you repeat something and get the same result, the chemical signal says, you did it right. The mind doesn't ask whether it's the best result, only whether it's consistent. That's why routine pleasures can dull over time, but still feel necessary. The satisfaction of being right about the experience can outweigh the experience itself. Think of a person who orders the same coffee every morning. The first sip doesn't thrill them anymore, but it feels wrong to skip it. The action itself gives comfort. The taste confirms what the brain expected, and that match triggers a microdose of reward. It's not pleasure in the traditional sense, it's reassurance. Predictable pleasure runs deeper than habit. It's a core feature of how humans manage uncertainty. Life throws constant change, and the brain anchors itself in familiar signals. The same shows, same foods, same patterns of thought. They remind you that some things stay the same. Predictability stabilizes dopamine flow. Novelty spikes it. Both matter, but too much of one makes you crave the other. The brain doesn't chase happiness, it chases equilibrium. Predictable pleasure gives that illusion, a small, steady line of satisfaction that feels safe to follow. It's not the most exciting feeling, but it's reliable. And for the brain, reliability often wins. Effortless loops are the habits that run themselves. They slip beneath awareness, using the body's memory instead of the mind's attention. You don't decide to do them anymore. You just find yourself doing them. They feel natural because they require no thought. The brain built them to save energy. Once a pattern proves useful or comforting, it moves from conscious effort to automatic execution. That's how behavior becomes habit, and how habits become invisible. The brain likes efficiency. Thinking costs energy, and energy is expensive to the body, so it delegates anything that repeats. At first, learning a new skill or routine demands attention. You focus on every step. Over time, repetition transfers control from the prefrontal cortex, which handles decision-making, to the basal ganglia, which stores patterns. When that happens, the action becomes effortless. You don't think about brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, or unlocking your phone. You just do it. The loop runs smoother than awareness. Imagine driving a familiar route. You start the car, merge onto the road, and before you realize it, you're at your destination. You can't recall every turn. The mind was somewhere else, maybe thinking about work or dinner. But the body handled the drive. Muscle memory, visual cues, and routine did the work. That's an effortless loop. Behavior guided by stored prediction rather than deliberate thought. The system trusts itself to perform. These loops aren't just mechanical. Emotional habits follow the same path. You might react to certain tones, words, or faces in ways that feel immediate. The response isn't reasoned, it's trained. A look of disapproval might trigger tension because it once predicted rejection. A familiar silence might bring worry because it used to mean conflict. These reactions live in the same part of the brain as physical routines. They aren't conscious choices. They're practiced responses that the body runs automatically to stay safe. Dopamine helps build these patterns. Each time you repeat a behavior that leads to a reward, dopamine marks it as successful. The chemical says, "This works, remember it." The next time the cue appears, the brain predicts the reward and fires early. The craving appears before awareness does. You find yourself reaching for your phone, opening the fridge, or checking an app without instruction. The loop has already begun. The conscious mind arrives late to the scene. This automatic process has advantages. It frees attention for new challenges. Without effortless loops, every small action would require planning. You'd waste energy deciding how to pour coffee or where to place your feet when walking. But the same efficiency that helps you function also traps you in unhelpful routines. The brain doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits. It only tracks repetition and reward. If a behavior lowers discomfort, even briefly, the system will store it. Consider someone who scrolls through social media whenever they feel bored. The cue is boredom. The response is checking the phone. The reward is mild distraction. Over time, the loop becomes effortless. The person doesn't think, "I'm bored, I'll scroll." Their hand just moves. The habit runs faster than awareness. The brain learned that this action closes the gap between discomfort and relief, so it repeats it without asking. The same happens with thought patterns. Worry, for example, can become an effortless loop. The cue might be uncertainty. The response is analysis, running through what-ifs and scenarios. The temporary reward is a sense of control. Even though worry rarely fixes anything, the brain records the relief that follows thinking about the problem. The next time uncertainty appears, the worry starts automatically. It feels involuntary because it is. The loop learned to protect itself. Effortless loops thrive on predictability. The brain relies on cues, time, place, emotion, your environment, to trigger stored behavior. Morning signals one set of loops, evening another. Certain rooms or faces activate specific responses. You might eat snacks only when watching TV, or feel restless only when sitting at your desk. These connections are learned associations. Once established, they run without input. Breaking a loop requires surfacing it. You can't change what you can't see. The first step is to notice when the loop starts. That pause introduces friction. It forces the prefrontal cortex back into the process. But this isn't easy. Automatic behaviors resist attention because attention slows them down. The brain prefers the smoothness of habit to the drag of choice. Even recognizing the loop can feel uncomfortable at first. You might notice how small cues trigger big actions. A notification light prompts you to check messages. A certain tone in a conversation makes you defend yourself. A sound in the kitchen cues hunger. None of these require thought. They bypass choice because they live in a part of the brain that favors repetition over reasoning. Awareness interrupts this pattern, but only with practice. Not all effortless loops are harmful. Many keep life stable. Routines around sleep, hygiene, and exercise maintain order without constant effort. The danger lies in not knowing which loops run you. The brain treats them all the same. If an action brings relief, it earns a spot in the automatic system. That's why people repeat behaviors that no longer serve them. They still trigger a chemical sense of ease, even if the conscious mind disagrees. You can see this when someone tries to quit a habit. The desire to stop exists in the thinking mind, but the loop lives in the deeper wiring. The cue triggers the craving before the decision can intervene. The person might succeed for a while, but under stress, the brain reverts to stored patterns. The loop runs itself until a new one replaces it. The system doesn't erase, it overwrites. Effortless loops define much of daily life. They explain why you move through familiar routines without thought, why certain feelings return on cue, why some habits resist change. The brain's goal isn't freedom. It's efficiency. It saves energy by predicting and repeating. Awareness takes effort. Habit runs free. What feels like instinct is often practice. What feels automatic is learned. And once learned, the loop keeps running. Quiet, smooth, and almost invisible. The brain is built to take shortcuts. It learns which paths bring reward and then skips the steps that slow it down. At first, every choice passes through awareness. You think, weigh options, and act. But once the brain recognizes a reliable pattern, it removes the need for permission. The result is automatic action, behavior that runs before you've decided. The shortcut saves time and energy, but it also makes you a passenger in your own routines. Neural shortcuts form through repetition. Each time you repeat an action that ends well, your brain strengthens the connections behind it. These pathways, made of neurons and synapses, become highways for behavior. The more you travel them, the smoother they get. Over time, the brain stops consulting the slower conscious systems for approval. It skips permission and moves straight to execution. That's what makes habits fast and hard to interrupt. Imagine you're driving home from work. You plan to stop at the store, but halfway there, you find yourself turning toward your house instead. You didn't mean to. The brain followed the route it knows best. It didn't wait for you to remember the plan. It ran the shortcut. This isn't carelessness, it's efficiency. The neural map for home after work is stronger than the newer path that includes a stop. The system chose the faster circuit. You can see the same process in smaller moments. Your phone buzzes, and your hand moves before you think. The cue, the vibration, triggers an automatic response. The shortcut bypasses deliberation. The brain learned that checking the phone often brings stimulation, relief, or reward. It doesn't need your approval anymore. The motion feels voluntary, but it's reflex. The permission step disappeared long ago. This skipping process begins in the basal ganglia, a part of the brain that stores habits. Once an action becomes predictable, The basal ganglia handle it, while the conscious mind focuses elsewhere. It's an elegant system. It allows you to walk, talk, drive, and cook without overthinking. But the same mechanism that saves effort also limits awareness. When behavior becomes automatic, it's no longer filtered through intention. You act first and understand later. Dopamine plays a key role in building these shortcuts. Each time a behavior ends in a reward, a good feeling, relief, success, dopamine marks the pathway that led to it. The brain learns, this works, do it again. The next time the same cue appears, dopamine fires early, anticipating the outcome. That early signal tells the body to act before the conscious mind catches up. The shortcut strengthens. Permission fades. This system is ancient. It evolved to help humans survive. Early humans couldn't afford to analyze every move. If a rustle in the grass once meant danger, the brain learned to react fast next time. That reflex saved lives. But in modern life, the same mechanism drives habits that no longer protect. Checking, scrolling, snacking, worrying. The brain still skips permission, even when the stakes are low. It's not disobedience. It's an outdated efficiency. Neural shortcuts make behavior feel inevitable. You might tell yourself, I'll stop after this one, but the brain doesn't negotiate. It already fired the motor sequence. Once the loop begins, it runs until interrupted. That's why willpower often feels weak. It's not that you lack discipline. It's that you're trying to overrule an established circuit with thought alone. By the time awareness arrives, the shortcut has already acted. Consider how this shows up in conversation. You react to certain phrases or tones automatically. Maybe someone raises their voice, and you defend yourself before you know it. The shortcut connects raised voice with danger or attack. Your nervous system responds faster than reason. Later, you might regret the reaction, wondering why you couldn't stay calm. The answer lies in the neural map. The brain skipped permission. It recognized a pattern and ran it. The same principle explains why people repeat behaviors that no longer serve them. The shortcut exists, not because the behavior feels good now, but because it once did. If smoking, drinking, drugs, etc. If smoking, drinking, drugs, the problem is not good anymore. The shortcut exists not because the behavior feels good now, but because it once did. If smoking, drinking, drugs, the problem is not good anymore. If smoking, drinking, drugs, the problem is not because the behavior feels good now, but because it once did. If smoking, drinking, drugs, the problem is not good anymore. If smoking, drinking, drugs, the problem is not good anymore. The same principle explains why people repeat behaviors that no longer serve them. The shortcut exists not because the behavior feels good now, but because it once did. If smoking, drinking, drug, or overworking once brought relief, the brain stored that root. Even when the reward fades, the shortcut stays. The system is built on prediction, not reflection. It keeps following old coordinates unless you deliberately draw new ones. Breaking a shortcut requires friction, something that slows the signal long enough for awareness to re-enter. This could be a pause, a breath, or a change in context. When you interrupt a cue response pattern, brain is forced to re-engage conscious processing. At first, it feels awkward. The mind prefers the ease of habit, but that awkwardness is progress. It means the shortcut has been surfaced. You can test this in small ways. If you always check your phone in line, leave it in your pocket once. The discomfort you feel isn't boredom. It's the neural system asking, why didn't we run the loop? The urge proves the shortcut exists. Each time you resist it, the signal weakens. Each time you give in, it grows stronger. The brain rewires through frequency, not force. Neural shortcuts also shape how you think. Repeated thoughts follow familiar pathways, just like repeated actions. Worry, self-criticism, and doubt can become automatic. The brain learns to skip permission before replaying them. It interprets familiar discomfort as safety because it's predictable. That's why old mental patterns feel involuntary. The shortcut fires faster than reason. This isn't a flaw. It's how learning works. The brain values speed over precision. It wants to reduce cognitive load to make life smoother. But smooth can mean mindless. When you act, react, or think without awareness, the shortcut is running the show. The system built to help you adapt ends up guiding you through the same motions, day after day, without question. Every habit, reflex, or knee-jerk response once required permission. You granted it, repeated it, and then forgot you ever said yes. The brain took over from there. It built a shortcut to save time. The path now runs deeper than thought, quick, reliable, and efficient. It's the unseen machinery behind every action that feels like instinct, every reaction that feels automatic. The brain skips permission, not because it rebels, but because it remembers too well. Motivation gets too much credit. It's treated like the engine of achievement. The brain is wired for efficiency. It doesn't waste energy thinking about what might feel meaningful. It looks for what's likely to feel good. Dopamine is the chemical that signals that likelihood. It doesn't deliver pleasure, it forecasts it. Each time you do something that brings a reward, dopamine strengthens the connection between the cue, the action, and the outcome. When the same cue appears again, dopamine fires early, nudging you toward the behavior before you've consciously decided. You move not because you're motivated, but because your brain already expects the payoff. Imagine you wake up and check your phone before getting out of bed. You didn't plan it. You didn't need motivation. The cue, the sight of the phone, triggered the prediction that something rewarding might be there. A message, a like, a small distraction. Dopamine fired, and your hand moved. The act didn't come from discipline or drive. It came from a learned association between cue and reward. The brain learned the sequence. It now runs automatically. That's what people often mistake for motivation, the feeling of wanting to act. But wanting and deciding are not the same thing. Wanting is chemical. It's the brain's way of saying, "This has paid off before. Try it again." Deciding involves thought, reflection, and context. Most behavior never reaches that level of analysis. It happens inside the circuitry that values efficiency over philosophy. The brain moves, and the mind explains it after. Discipline is slower. It relies on conscious override, the ability to resist one signal and follow another. But even discipline depends on dopamine. Every time you follow through on a hard task and it ends well, dopamine reinforces the path you took to get there. That's how self-control becomes habit. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth or go to work every morning. Those actions became predictable sources of stability. The brain learned that the outcome feels right, so it repeats the process. The drive to do them now comes from familiarity, not inspiration. Think about exercise. People wait for motivation to start, but what keeps them going long-term isn't inspiration, it's conditioning. The first few workouts require decision-making. You weigh effort against reward. Once the habit forms, the cue of time or place triggers anticipation. The brain predicts the post-exercise satisfaction, and dopamine fires in advance. The behavior becomes self-starting. You no longer need to convince yourself to move. The system does it for you. Motivation fades because it's been replaced by prediction. The myth of motivation comes from how it feels. When dopamine rises, you feel energized and focused. The world seems open, full of possibility. You label that feeling as motivation, but what you're sensing is chemistry preparing the body for pursuit. The brain uses dopamine to generate forward motion, curiosity, persistence, effort. The more uncertain the reward, the stronger the chemical signal. That's why new goals feel exciting and familiar routines feel dull. The brain pays more attention to what might pay off than what's guaranteed to. Marketers and designers use this principle all the time. Every notification, progress bar, or streak counter works by triggering dopamine through uncertainty and anticipation. The brain learns to chase that tiny burst of chemical reward, mistaking it for progress. You open apps not because you're motivated, but because the system trained your prediction circuits to expect pleasure there. The process is mechanical, not emotional. Motivation also fades faster than people expect because dopamine adapts. Once the reward becomes predictable, the brain releases less of it. The same routine no longer feels exciting. That's why new habits feel easy for a few days and then stall. The brain has adjusted. Without novelty, the signal weakens. You mistake the drop in dopamine for a loss of motivation, but nothing vanished. The chemistry simply balanced out. The task now feels neutral instead of thrilling. This is where discipline often gets misunderstood. People imagine discipline as force, pushing through resistance, but it's better understood as structure. Discipline is the design that supports behavior when dopamine dips. It replaces the rush of novelty with the comfort of repetition. Over time, that repetition forms new prediction circuits. The brain begins to expect the benefits of action rather than the discomfort of effort. You start because it feels right, not because you feel inspired. Even procrastination follows this same logic. You delay not because you lack motivation, but because another action predicts a more immediate reward. The brain isn't lazy. It's loyal to its strongest signals. If checking messages gives instant relief from discomfort, the system prioritizes that over the distant reward of finishing work. Dopamine rewards the short-term loop because it's certain. The long-term payoff feels abstract, so the brain postpones it. What looks like a moral failure is usually a chemical one. Understanding this doesn't remove responsibility, but it changes how you approach effort. You stop waiting for motivation to appear and start shaping cues instead. You design the environment to trigger the right predictions: a tidy workspace, a visible reminder, a consistent schedule. Each small cue trains the brain to expect success, not struggle. Over time, those cues become automatic triggers for action. The process feels natural, not forced. Motivation is unreliable because it depends on emotion, and emotion fluctuates. Dopamine doesn't care about your goals. It cares about expected reward. When the reward is uncertain or distant, the chemical drive fades. What fills that space is structure. Systems that remove decision-making and let behavior run like a reflex. That's how discipline really works. It's not about willpower. It's about teaching the brain where to look for satisfaction. Every habit, every routine, every consistent effort began as chemistry. Dopamine drove the first step, not motivation. Discipline came later, once the pattern became predictable. The myth is that you need to feel ready to act. The truth is that action teaches the brain what to want. The system learns from motion, not intention. Motivation may start the story, but dopamine writes it first. Pleasure always comes with a cost. Every high the brain creates must balance itself with a low. This rhythm isn't punishment. It's regulation. The body protects itself from overstimulation by restoring equilibrium. The rush of dopamine that comes from a reward, a laugh, or a burst of excitement doesn't stay. Once it peaks, the brain lowers the level to prevent overload. What follows is the quiet dip that often feels like emptiness. This is pleasure debt, the built-in repayment that follows every spike. Dopamine controls the pursuit of reward. It rises when you expect something good to happen, not when it happens. The spike prepares the body for action. You move, engage, chase. When the reward arrives, dopamine drops. That drop can feel like loss, but it's just balance returning. The brain measures both sides of the wave, the pleasure and the recovery. The more intense the high, the deeper the low that follows. Imagine scrolling through social media late at night. You tell yourself you'll check one more post, one more story. Each swipe brings a small surge of anticipation. Maybe there will be something funny, interesting, or validating. For a while, you feel alert and engaged. Then the feed begins to blur. You close the app, but the room feels flat. The quiet feels heavier than before. That emptiness isn't boredom, it's the low after the high. Your dopamine system is resetting. The same pattern appears in every quick pleasure: sugar, caffeine, shopping, entertainment. The brain releases dopamine in short bursts each time it predicts reward. The first bite of dessert, the first sip of coffee, the first laugh in a movie, all cause small spikes. But the system can't stay high forever. When the stimulus ends, dopamine levels drop below baseline for a time. The greater the stimulation, the longer it takes to return to normal. This is why binging anything, even mild pleasures, often leaves you feeling worse afterward. Pleasure debt builds when you chase highs faster than the body can recover. Each spike creates a temporary deficit. The brain borrows from tomorrow's calm to pay for today's excitement. When you do this often, the baseline of satisfaction lowers. Things that once felt good now feel flat. You need more stimulation to reach the same level of pleasure. It's not moral weakness, it's neurochemistry. The system adjusts to protect itself from overload, and in doing so, dulls its own sensitivity. This process explains why the first time often feels the best. The first hit of a new song, the first victory in a game, the first compliment after effort, all hit harder because the brain hasn't adapted yet. Each repetition gives a smaller return. The brain learns what to expect and releases less dopamine each time. The low still comes, but the high weakens. That imbalance leaves a subtle craving, the sense that you almost felt something, a shadow of the first rush. In daily life, this pattern hides inside normal routines. The morning coffee that once woke you now just brings you back to baseline. The weekend that used to feel like escape now just resets exhaustion. The brain has adjusted to the pattern of spikes and dips. Pleasure debt makes stability feel dull because the system expects stimulation to feel alive. When it doesn't arrive, the low feels sharper. The debt collects quietly. People often try to fix this by chasing more highs, louder music, more caffeine, faster content, constant novelty. Each hit works for a moment, but deepens the deficit. The brain's tolerance increases. The baseline pleasure drops further. The cycle becomes self-sustaining. Spike, dip, repeat. The harder you push for excitement, the less satisfaction you get. The chemistry that once motivated becomes the trap that keeps you chasing. The same cycle happens in relationships and achievements. After a big win or milestone, the low that follows can feel confusing. You expect lasting happiness, but the feeling fades quickly. The brain adapted to the surge of dopamine from anticipation. Once the goal is reached, the prediction error, the gap between expectation and reality, disappears. Dopamine drops, leaving a void. You might interpret this as disappointment or loss of meaning, but it's just the natural low that follows a chemical peak. Even rest can trigger pleasure debt when it's used as escape. Binge watching a show or scrolling through hours of short videos can feel relaxing in the moment. But afterward, you feel foggy and unsettled. The dopamine system was overstimulated by rapid feedback and novelty. When the input stops, the brain dips below normal function. That drop can make you restless or anxious, leading you back to the same source of stimulation. The cycle continues because the low mimics craving. Breaking pleasure debt doesn't mean rejecting pleasure. It means understanding timing. The brain needs recovery between spikes to restore sensitivity. Small, slow pleasures, conversation, walks, creative work, reading, create steady dopamine release without deep lows. They balance stimulation with calm, but these forms of reward feel subtle compared to modern highs, so they take time to retrain. At first, they feel flat. Then the system recalibrates. You can see this recalibration when someone takes a break from overstimulation. The first few days feel empty. Food tastes bland, music feels quiet, time slows down. That's the nervous system clearing its balance sheet. Over time, small pleasures regain color. The baseline rises again. The brain learns to appreciate stability. But until that happens, the low feels endless because the system has forgotten what normal feels like. Pleasure debt runs silently through modern life because the tools that create it are everywhere. Phones, platforms, and media design rely on frequent spikes. Notifications, novelty, instant response. Each one trains the brain to expect constant stimulation. When it stops, the low feels unnatural. But it isn't new. It's the original state before overuse. The quiet that follows a spike isn't emptiness. It's the system resetting, waiting to begin again at balance. Identity doesn't form in sudden declarations. It builds quietly through repetition. The mind learns who you are by watching what you do, not by listening to what you promise. Every repeated action, thought, or reaction leaves a trace. Over time, those traces link together, forming a pattern that becomes you. It doesn't matter whether the act is large or small. Repetition is what convinces the brain that a behavior belongs. This is subtle self-programming, the slow writing of identity in soft ink. The brain is a prediction machine. It learns through consistency. Each time you repeat something, the neural pathways behind that behavior grow stronger. Synapses that fire together wire together. That's the rule. When you think a thought often enough, or perform an action regularly, the brain starts predicting it. It assumes this is what we do. The behavior shifts from decision to identity. You no longer choose it, you embody it. Consider the way you reach for your phone during quiet moments. At first, it was a choice, a way to fill space. Now it's instinct. The cue appears and your hand moves. The repetition trained the brain to expect reward from that motion. You didn't declare yourself a phone checker. You became one through repetition. The act wrote itself into your habits until it blended into who you are. The ink was soft, but the script stayed. Identity builds this way in every domain. You become organized not by deciding to be organized once, but by practicing order until it feels natural. You become anxious by rehearsing worry. You become kind by performing small acts of patience. Each pattern, writes a version of yourself that the brain accepts as fact. It's not about belief, it's about evidence. The brain collects proof through repetition. If it sees the same action often enough, it assumes it's true. This process is chemical as much as mental. Dopamine reinforces behavior that leads to reward, even if the reward is small. When you repeat an action and it ends with relief, comfort, or pleasure, dopamine strengthens the neural link that caused it. The brain learns to expect that outcome and prepares for it earlier each time. What starts as effort turns into habit. What starts as habit becomes identity. The chemistry of motivation becomes the architecture of self. Imagine a writer who sits at their desk every morning, even when they don't feel inspired. At first, it's mechanical, a routine forced by willpower. Over time, the act itself becomes the cue. The brain begins to associate sitting down with creative output. The resistance fades because the pattern feels familiar. The writer starts to think, "This is what I do." That thought isn't just reflection, it's a chemical memory. The repetition carved identity into the neural map. The same principle works in reverse. When a person repeats avoidance, the brain learns that discomfort means danger. The avoidance becomes automatic. Over time, "I avoid challenges" turns into "I am someone who avoids." The self-image forms from behavior, not the other way around. The loop is subtle but strong. Each time the pattern runs, it deepens the definition of who you are in the brain's internal language. This is why change feels unnatural at first. When you act against your established pattern, the brain resists. It doesn't recognize the new behavior as belonging to you. The chemistry behind self-programming doesn't judge, it just measures frequency. Doing something once doesn't rewrite the code. Doing it again and again does. Identity doesn't change in a moment of clarity. It changes through repetition that proves the clarity was real. Even the words you use about yourself play into this system. Each time you say, "I'm bad at this," you're reinforcing a pattern of expectation. The statement becomes a cue. The brain doesn't analyze accuracy, it records consistency. Over time, those small phrases shape the range of what feels possible. You act within the limits you've rehearsed. The repetition doesn't just describe identity, it builds it. You can see this pattern everywhere. People who think of themselves as unlucky often behave in ways that confirm it, hesitating, withdrawing, expecting loss. People who identify as disciplined perform steady actions that maintain that label. In both cases, the label isn't the start. The repetition is. The identity follows the behavior like a shadow. The brain uses the pattern as a reference point for future prediction. This is what we do in this situation. Subtle self-programming happens most strongly in quiet, repeated choices. The small decisions that seem unimportant are the ones that accumulate. The first time you skip a workout, it's nothing. The 10th time, it becomes normal. The same is true for positive habits. A single act of focus doesn't make you diligent, but doing it daily writes diligence into your nervous system. The repetition becomes your story, told in behavior rather than words. Dopamine also plays a part in why these repetitions feel right. When a behavior becomes predictable, the brain releases dopamine not only for success, but for the accuracy of prediction itself. The system rewards being consistent. That's why people often stick with routines that no longer serve them. They feel familiar, and familiarity itself produces mild satisfaction. The brain values stability more than change. It reads repetition as safety, even if it limits growth. This is what makes intentional repetition powerful. You can't erase old patterns by wishing them away. You can only replace them with new ones that compete for space. Each time you act differently, you weaken the old neural path and strengthen a new one. The ink is soft but persistent. Over time, the new behavior feels more natural than the old one. The self rewrites itself line by line. Think about learning a language. At first, you translate everything in your head. It feels slow and forced. But after enough repetition, the words bypass translation. They come directly. That's what identity does with behavior. Once a pattern repeats enough, it stops needing conscious thought. The self becomes fluent in it. The way you respond, move, think, all of it becomes instinct, written by experience. The process never stops. Every day, repetition updates identity in small, invisible strokes. You don't feel it happening. You live it. The thoughts you return to, the habits you repeat, the tones you use when you speak, they all write who you are in the brain's quiet handwriting. The ink doesn't dry quickly. It stays soft, always ready to be written over. Thoughts have patterns, just like actions. The brain doesn't only form habits of behavior, it forms habits of perception. Each time you interpret the world a certain way, that interpretation becomes easier to repeat. Dopamine plays a quiet role in this. It rewards not just what you do, but how you see. Every belief, expectation, and assumption that leads to a sense of control or reward gets reinforced. Over time, dopamine doesn't just guide motion, it sculpts attention itself. The mind learns through prediction. It looks for patterns that reduce uncertainty. When those patterns prove reliable, dopamine marks them as valuable. The brain then filters new experiences through that familiar lens. You stop seeing things as they are and start seeing them as you expect them to be. That's how habits of thought form. You don't wake up and decide to think negatively, optimistically, or cynically. You practice those perceptions until they feel automatic. Imagine walking into a room full of people. One person notices the noise and feels excitement. Another notices the same noise and feels anxiety. The difference isn't the sound, it's the neural filter. Each brain predicts the situation based on past experience. If social situations once brought reward, dopamine reinforces the perception that they're opportunities. If they once brought discomfort, dopamine reinforces vigilance. The feeling of reality depends on the pathways your brain has practiced. This mechanism shows up everywhere. If you tend to look for problems, you'll find them quickly because your brain is trained to predict threat. The moment something uncertain happens, dopamine fires in anticipation of solving or avoiding it. The system rewards vigilance. That's why some people can't rest even in calm environments. Their brain doesn't interpret stillness as safety. It interprets it as a lack of control. The perception habit feeds itself. The same process explains optimism. A person who consistently expects good outcomes experiences small dopamine bursts when those expectations come true. The brain links confidence with reward, making hope a default stance. The perception becomes self-fulfilling. Each success, however small, reinforces the belief that things will work out. The world hasn't changed. The chemistry has. Over time, dopamine shapes what you notice and ignore. The brain can't process everything, so it filters information based on what it predicts will be rewarding or relevant. If you've learned that achievement brings pleasure, your attention narrows toward goals and performance. If you've learned that connection brings comfort, your attention tilts toward relationships. Each focus area strengthens its own circuit. The brain rewards the predictions that match its past successes. Consider how this works with social media. Every like or message gives a small dopamine spike, reinforcing the thought that checking the app will bring reward. But beyond behavior, the system also rewires perception. You start scanning your surroundings for moments worth sharing, framing experiences as potential content. You don't just act differently, you see differently. The habit of thought, the expectation of validation, changes how you interpret your own life. Habits of thought can build subtle distortions. When the brain predicts reward from certain mental patterns, worry, comparison, control, it begins to favor them, even when they cause discomfort. Worry, for instance, produces small relief when a feared outcome doesn't happen. That relief releases dopamine, teaching the brain that worry worked. The next time uncertainty appears, worry returns faster. The chemical system doesn't judge accuracy, it tracks results. The thought pattern repeats because it predicts safety. You can see this loop in creative work too. An artist who receives praise for one style of painting starts to focus on reproducing that success. The brain marks that recognition as reward and begins to narrow perception. Other ideas fade from view. What once felt like exploration becomes repetition. The thought habit forms not from laziness, but from reinforcement. Dopamine encouraged the mind to stay close to what once worked. This sculpting effect is why perspective changes are difficult. When you try to see differently, the brain resists because the existing patterns are efficient. They've been rehearsed through years of chemical approval. Thinking differently feels strange, not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't yet match the dopamine map. The brain reads unfamiliar perception as risk. Change means prediction error, and prediction error feels like discomfort. It works the same way in relationships. If your brain learned that criticism keeps you safe by preventing disappointment, it will keep scanning for faults. The system believes vigilance protects connection. Dopamine rewards the relief that comes from spotting a potential problem early. The result is a habit of perception that filters for flaws. You're not trying to be critical. Your chemistry believes it's helping. Breaking these loops begins with noticing how automatic they are. Most thoughts feel like observations, not choices, but many are just practiced responses to dopamine conditioning. Each time a thought leads to relief, success, or emotional closure, the brain reinforces it. That's why certain phrases or mental stories keep returning. I always mess up. Things usually work out. People can't be trusted. They've become efficient predictions. The brain uses them to reduce uncertainty, even if they distort reality. The process isn't limited to mood or personality. It shapes how you interpret information. Confirmation bias, the tendency to favor what supports existing beliefs, comes straight from dopamine's influence. When evidence aligns with your expectations, you feel a small hit of satisfaction. That hit trains the brain to keep looking for similar evidence. Over time, perception narrows. You don't just prefer certain ideas, you stop noticing others. The chemistry rewards mental agreement over accuracy. Habits of thought can serve you or limit you, depending on what they reward. Curiosity, for example, thrives when dopamine fires for discovery rather than certainty. If your brain links reward to learning, you keep exploring. But if it links reward to being right, exploration feels threatening. In that case, curiosity fades. The same chemical that drives innovation can also enforce rigidity, depending on what pattern it supports. The subtlety of this process is what makes it powerful. You can change behavior by force, but thought habits require awareness. You have to catch yourself in the act of perceiving, noticing not just what you think, but how your mind frames it. Each time you pause before reacting, you introduce a gap. That gap lets new associations form. When a different interpretation brings relief or clarity, dopamine begins to reward it. The map shifts a little. Over time, perception rewires itself, one prediction at a time. Dopamine doesn't just drive what you do, it decides what you see. The mind builds its reality around what the chemistry rewards. Every perception is filtered through expectation, and every expectation was once a repetition. The world feels consistent, not because it is, but because your brain has trained itself to find what it already believes. A brain is not built for calm, it's built for pursuit. Dopamine keeps it moving, always looking for the next thing that might feel good. That system once helped humans survive. It made people curious enough to search for food, shelter, and connection. But in a world where everything is within reach, that same drive can turn restless. The more the brain can chase, the less it feels. Learning to want less isn't about rejecting pleasure. It's about restoring sensitivity. Training the mind to feel deeply again, instead of endlessly seeking. Dopamine minimalism begins with understanding how the chemical works. It doesn't create happiness, it creates anticipation. The surge you feel when you look forward to something isn't joy, it's preparation. The system is designed to push you toward reward, not let you rest in it. When you finally get what you wanted, dopamine drops. That's why satisfaction fades quickly. The brain evolved to keep looking. But modern life feeds that loop constantly. Likes, updates, deliveries, shows, messages. The chase never stops long enough for contentment to appear. Imagine someone checking their phone every few minutes. Each notification brings a small burst of dopamine, a tiny spark of maybe. Maybe someone liked their post. Maybe there's new information. Each check feels purposeful, but the reward fades in seconds. What remains is the reflex, the urge to check again. The brain learns that movement feels better than stillness. Over time, it stops caring about the content. It only wants the hit of anticipation. The person becomes hooked on potential, not pleasure. This pattern shows up in work, relationships, and even self-improvement. The brain mistakes wanting for meaning. You tell yourself that progress equals happiness, but the chase becomes the habit. The moment you reach one goal, another replaces it. The pleasure window keeps moving forward. The chemical system is doing what it's supposed to, motivating you to seek. But the result is a quiet sense of emptiness. The highs don't satisfy, they reset the cycle. Dopamine minimalism doesn't mean removing reward. It means reducing noise so real reward stands out again. It's about noticing how much of your energy goes toward shallow stimulation. The constant switching between tasks, apps, and phones. And goals floods the brain with small spikes. Each one feels harmless, but together they numb sensitivity. The baseline pleasure level drops. Calm feels flat. Slowness feels wrong. You start needing more stimulation just to feel normal. The first step to wanting less is to see how much you already chase. You can do this by watching how you reach for comfort. Notice when your hand moves toward your phone, or when you open a new tab without thinking. These are cues, signals that the dopamine system is looking for activity. The goal isn't to judge, but to observe. Each moment of awareness weakens the automatic pull. When you stop feeding the loop for even a few seconds, the system hesitates. The pause is where sensitivity begins to return. When stimulation slows down, discomfort often surfaces. The brain interprets this as boredom or restlessness, but it's actually withdrawal. You're feeling the absence of constant reward prediction. The low that follows a high isn't failure, it's balance. Sitting through that low without reaching for distraction retrains the system. The next moment of real pleasure, a walk, a conversation, a quiet meal, feels richer because it isn't competing with 100 artificial peaks. Consider how this works with food. When you eat highly processed snacks, your brain gets rapid dopamine spikes from salt, sugar, and fat. Ordinary food then tastes dull. But if you eat simply for a while, your sensitivity returns. Subtle flavors come back to life. The same rule applies to every other kind of reward. The more you flood the system, the less you feel. The less you chase, the more detail you notice. Dopamine minimalism asks for subtraction, not denial. It's not about living without pleasure. It's about lowering the volume so the signal becomes clear. You start to notice the quiet rewards, the slow rise of sunlight in a room, the sound of breath, the feeling of completing one small task with full attention. These moments trigger dopamine too, but gently. The spikes are smaller, the drops softer. The system finds rhythm instead of chaos. You can think of it as adjusting sensitivity. When the brain stops expecting constant novelty, it starts rewarding depth instead. Reading one book deeply becomes more satisfying than skimming 100 headlines. A single, honest conversation replaces hours of surface scrolling. The pleasure doesn't come from the scale of stimulation, but from the fullness of attention. You feel more because you're no longer dividing your focus across dozens of minor rewards. Dopamine minimalism also changes how time feels. In a state of constant pursuit, hours pass without notice because attention keeps jumping. When you reduce inputs, time expands. Waiting no longer feels like loss. It becomes space. The brain stops racing toward the next hit and begins to settle into the present. This doesn't happen all at once. At first, it feels strange, like silence after loud music. But soon, the quiet becomes texture. You start feeling again where you used to seek. This approach isn't about discipline or moral restraint. It's about physiology. Dopamine is not evil. It's neutral. It becomes a problem only when it fires too often, when you flood the system. You desensitize it. The solution isn't to remove pleasure, but to space it out. Let the highs breathe. Let the lows recalibrate. The brain can feel deeply only when it's allowed to rest between peaks. Over time, wanting less becomes natural. The nervous system learns that peace is not the absence of reward, but the recovery that makes reward meaningful. You stop mistaking stimulation for satisfaction. You begin to see how little you need to feel whole. The dopamine system keeps working, but now it runs slower, steadier. You feel more, not because life got louder, but because you finally gave it room to be heard.